Oregon is a land of dense forests, misty mountains, and rivers that whisper forgotten tales. Hidden deep within these woods lie village ruins, remnants of lives long gone, swallowed by time and nature. But these ruins are not empty. Tonight, we venture into 25 of Oregon's most haunted village ruins, where ghostly figures wander, whispers echo through trees, and shadows linger long after the living have left. Each village has a story of tragedy, disease, betrayal, and lives abruptly ended. The wind carries voices of the past, and the trees conceal watchers who never left. As we step into these forgotten hamlets, remember, the past is not dead in these woods. The spirits here are alive in memory, and sometimes they are alive enough to reach out. Sheniko, Oregon, once hailed as the wool capital of the world, now stands as a silent testament to a past filled with industry, prosperity, and sudden decline. Nestled in the high desert of Wasco County, the town's streets are mostly empty, its buildings weathered by wind and sun, and its boardwalks cracked and sagging under years of neglect. The old train tracks, which once carried bales of wool and freight to faraway markets, stretch into the horizon, rusting and unused. Yet, they remain a focal point for those drawn to the town's eerie reputation. Visitors to Sheniko often speak of more than its historical significance. Shadowy figures appear along the tracks, whispers echo near the old depot, and sudden cold spots chill the air without any natural explanation, lending the town a ghostly atmosphere that has persisted long after the last resident departed. The history of Sheniko is inseparable from its haunting. In the early 1900s, the town flourished as a hub for the wool industry, with the railroad bringing commerce and life to this remote stretch of Oregon. Merchants, railroad workers, and ranchers walked its streets, their daily routines punctuated by the rhythmic clatter of trains and the hum of commerce. Yet the prosperity was fragile. As new transportation routes bypassed Sheniko and the wool industry declined, the town emptied, leaving behind a skeleton of its former vibrancy. Over time, local stories began to circulate, accounts of unexplained footsteps along empty streets, figures moving along the tracks at night, and whispers heard near the old depot. Some believe these phenomena are the spirits of workers, residents, and travelers who remain tied to the town, unable or unwilling to leave the place where their lives unfolded. Visitors describe shadowy figures moving along the old train tracks with deliberate, silent motion. At first glance, they may appear human, dressed in period clothing or indistinct forms, but a closer look reveals their outlines blurred, almost insubstantial. These figures are often seen at dawn or dusk, pacing near the tracks, pausing as if waiting for a train that will never arrive. Some appear to carry objects, a briefcase, a sack, or even bundles of wool mimicking routines from long ago. The figures rarely approach the living, yet their presence is palpable. And those who linger near the tracks report sudden chills, a sense of being watched, or an unshakable feeling of unease. When approached directly, the figures vanish into shadows or dissolve into the dry desert wind, leaving only the memory of their passage and the faint echo of footsteps on gravel and timber. The old Sheniko Depot, once the heartbeat of the town's commerce, is a focal point for whispers and strange sounds. Visitors often report hearing voices, soft murmurs, fragmented conversations, or the distant call of someone announcing a train arrival emanating from the building when it is empty. Sometimes these whispers carry names, familiar or unfamiliar, repeated as if calling to someone who will never answer. Others describe the feeling of being observed while standing inside or near the depot, with sudden cold spots that appear without warning, chilling the skin and sending shivers through the body. Some claim to see shadows crossing the platform, walking along the edges of the building, or disappearing behind the depot doors. The combination of auditory and visual phenomena makes the depot a particularly unsettling place for those drawn to the spectral history of Sheniko. One evening, a visitor named Claire arrived at Sheniko, drawn by the town's reputation for haunting. As she wandered along the train tracks at twilight, she noticed faint shadows pacing ahead, moving slowly, deliberately, pausing as though waiting. A cold wind swept across the tracks, carrying soft whispers that seemed almost intelligible, but faded whenever she tried to focus on them. Near the depot, she felt sudden chills, as if invisible hands brushed her skin, and she glimpsed shadowy figures moving across the platform. Lanterns or lights were nowhere in sight, yet a faint glow seemed to illuminate the edges of the figures, highlighting their outlines against the desert dusk. Claire watched as a figure bent to lift an invisible bundle, then straightened and continued pacing along the tracks before dissolving into the night. The experience left her with a mixture of awe and unease, a vivid reminder that Shiniko is a place where the past continues to linger in spectral form. Other visitors report similar encounters. The town's empty streets and deserted buildings amplify every sound: the scraping of wind across windows, the creak of doors swinging on rusted hinges, the distant echo of footsteps along the boardwalk. Shadowy figures appear near abandoned houses or the old general store, sometimes carrying objects, sometimes walking silently along the tracks. Cold spots appear without warning, chilling the air even in the heat of day, and whispers rise from empty corners or from within the depot, as if the town itself remembers the lives once lived there. Some interpret these occurrences as warnings, marking the remnants of past lives and struggles. Others believe the spirits are trapped, endlessly repeating gestures and routines from the town's heyday, bound to a place they cannot leave. The shadowy figures and unexplained sounds are subtle but unforgettable, rarely fully visible. The figures glide along tracks, pacing streets, and moving through buildings with fluid, silent motions. Observers often describe a mixture of fear, fascination, and reverence, recognizing them as echoes of the town's history and the people who lived, worked, and perhaps died there. Shiniko's abandoned streets, depot, and tracks are not merely relics. They are stages where the past continues to act out in faint, ghostly repetition. Night after night, and again, at the first light of dawn, Shiniko awakens in its own spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures pace along the old train tracks. Whispers rise from the depot and empty streets, and cold spots drift across buildings and boardwalks. For anyone wandering through this abandoned town, Shiniko is more than a historical site. It is a place where the living encounter the lost, a haunting, beautiful, and unforgettable reminder that some presences endure beyond life and that memory, like the desert wind, persists forever. Waldo, in Lincoln County, Oregon, is a village that time and tragedy have all but erased. Once a small community of clustered homes, businesses, and schoolhouses, Waldo thrived briefly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries before fire, economic decline, and neglect left it abandoned. Today, the village is little more than overgrown streets, crumbling foundations, and remnants of wooden buildings swallowed by brush and moss. The air carries a quiet that is almost unnatural, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of wind through trees. Yet those who venture into Waldo after sunset or in the quiet hours of night speak of something far stranger than solitude. Shadowy figures flit among the overgrown streets. Faint cries echo from foundations, and an eerie sensation of being watched lingers in the chill that rises without cause. The village's history is inseparable from its haunting. Waldo grew as a small logging and farming community, its residents working hard to carve out livelihoods from the dense forests of Lincoln County. Children played in the streets and schoolrooms rang with laughter, while townspeople gathered for dances, church services, and celebrations. But misfortune struck in waves. Fire swept through wooden structures, destroying homes and businesses, while economic hardships forced families to abandon their plots and seek opportunities elsewhere. Gradually, Waldo emptied, leaving behind buildings that decayed in the relentless coastal climate. Over time, the stories of ghostly children and faint cries began to circulate. Locals whispered that the spirits of children who had died in the fires or vanished in the years of decline still roamed the streets, forever trapped between play and tragedy, laughter and sorrow. Visitors to Waldo often report seeing shadowy figures darting between overgrown foundations and along the remains of streets that were once bustling with life. At first, the figures appear fleeting, like shapes caught out of the corner of the eye, moving too fast to focus on fully. Upon closer observation, they seem childlike small in stature, light on their feet, and endlessly active. They are often seen running along cracked sidewalks, weaving through tall grass, or peering from the ruins of old homes, their forms indistinct, sometimes semi-transparent, as if suspended between the material world and another. These figures rarely linger long in one place, and attempts to approach them result in their vanishing into shadows or disappearing behind fallen walls and overgrown vegetation. Witnesses frequently describe an uncanny feeling of being followed, watched, or guided by these unseen presences as they navigate the abandoned streets. The sounds of Waldo contribute to its haunting presence. Faint cries, sometimes high-pitched and fleeting, drift through the night, echoing from the hollowed foundations and empty doorways. Some visitors hear what seems like laughter, echoing briefly before fading into silence, or the soft patter of footsteps across broken wooden floors. Others report sudden gusts of cold wind, chills that have no natural source, or the sensation of being lightly touched as if invisible hands brush against clothing or skin. The auditory phenomena are subtle yet persistent, adding layers of unease to the experience of walking through the abandoned village. The combination of visual and auditory anomalies makes Waldo a place that feels suspended in time, where past and present intersect in ghostly repetition. One evening, a visitor named Thomas arrived at Waldo, drawn by stories of the village's spectral residents. As twilight deepened, he wandered along the overgrown streets, stepping carefully over roots and broken pavement. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw small, shadowy forms darting between remnants of houses. He paused, listening, and the faint echoes of laughter and high-pitched cries carried across the empty village. Thomas felt a sudden chill, a coldness that seemed to rise from the foundations themselves, and he sensed movement just beyond his line of sight. Shadowy figures appeared and disappeared among the overgrown streets, pacing along sidewalks that had long been cracked and broken. At one point, he glimpsed a figure at the edge of a crumbling schoolhouse, bending as if to pick up an invisible object, before vanishing into thin air. The experience left him with a mixture of awe, fear, and an unshakable sense that the children of Waldo were still present, forever replaying fragments of their lives within the confines of the abandoned village. Other visitors recount similar experiences. The overgrown streets and ruined buildings amplify every sound, the scraping of branches, the distant crash of a falling board, or the soft echo of footsteps. Shadowy forms appear near old homes, playfully weaving through overgrown lots, or standing silently on foundations that mark where buildings once stood. Faint cries rise from empty corners, sometimes forming patterns that suggest words, names, or calls for attention. Cold spots appear unexpectedly, chilling the skin even in warm weather. Many interpret these phenomena as echoes of lives abruptly interrupted, the spirits of children forever caught between memory and existence, unable to leave the place that was once their home. The shadowy children of Waldo are fleeting but unforgettable. Rarely fully visible, they run, bend, or pause along streets, through foundations, and across overgrown yards. Observers often describe a combination of fear and fascination, a recognition of the lives that once filled this village and the tragedy that emptied it. Waldo is not merely a collection of ruins. It is a stage where the past continues to replay itself, where echoes of laughter, cries, and footsteps linger long after the town has been abandoned. Night after night, and again, at the first light of dawn, Waldo awakens in its quiet, spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures pace the overgrown streets, faint cries echo from the ruins of foundations, and sudden chills drift through abandoned buildings. For anyone wandering among the remains of the village, Waldo is more than a ghost town. It is a place where the living encounter the lost, a haunting, beautiful, an unforgettable reminder that some presences endure beyond life, and that memory, like the wind, through overgrown streets, persists forever. Bohemia, nestled deep in the forests of Lane County, Oregon, is a village frozen in time, a relic of the mining era that once brought life and labor to the area. Today, the town is little more than scattered ruins, old mining equipment rusting among moss-covered trees, and trails that wind through the dense woods where once carts carried ore and miners worked tirelessly. The village's history is steeped in ambition, toil, and ultimately, tragedy. Over the years, a series of mysterious accidents claimed the lives of many miners, leading to the gradual abandonment of the town. Those who visit Bohemia today often speak of ghostly miners moving among the equipment, the echo of tools striking stone, and the eerie sensation that the forest itself remembers the lives and labor of the people who once called this place home. Bohemia began as a thriving mining settlement in the late 19th century. Prospectors discovered gold and silver deposits in the surrounding hills, drawing men and families eager for opportunity. Wooden shacks, supply stores, and makeshift workshops were constructed along narrow paths, and the clang of hammers, the scrape of picks against stone, and the rumble of carts filled the air. Miners worked long hours, often in dangerous conditions, tunneling into the earth and hauling ore along rickety tracks. Life was harsh, but it was sustained by the promise of wealth and the camaraderie of those who shared in the labor and hardships. Yet the promise of prosperity was fragile. Accidents were common in the mine's collapsing tunnels. Runaway carts and unexplained cave-ins claimed lives unexpectedly, often leaving families grieving and the town's population gradually dwindling. It is these tragedies that are said to fuel the hauntings of Bohemia. Visitors frequently report shadowy figures near old mining equipment and along paths that lead to collapsed shafts. At first glance, these apparitions appear human, dressed in period mining clothes, but closer observation reveals their outlines to be blurred or insubstantial. Like the residue of memory pressing against the present, some are seen bending over rusted carts, hauling invisible ore, or hammering at tools that produce no sound, as if caught in a loop of labor that transcends death. Others stand at the edge of shafts, staring into darkness that seems to stretch endlessly, their faces indistinct but somehow charged with the weight of unfinished work and lost time. The auditory phenomena of Bohemia contribute significantly to its haunting atmosphere. Even when the forest is quiet, visitors often hear the faint clatter of tools, the scraping of picks against rock, or the echo of hammers striking iron. Sometimes these sounds are accompanied by footsteps on the wooden walkways or the distant groan of minecarts shifting across rails long unused. The noises are subtle yet persistent, creating a sense that the forest itself is alive with the echoes of labor past. On occasion, visitors report hearing voices, fragmented conversations, grunts of exertion, or calls warning of danger emanating from the old mining tunnels or the dense woods, leaving an impression that the miners' spirits are still at work, bound to the village by the weight of history and the unfinished business of their lives. One evening, a visitor named Marcus arrived at Bohemia, drawn by the tales of ghostly miners and unexplained sounds. As twilight descended, he wandered among rusted carts and collapsed wooden structures. In the dim light, he noticed shadowy figures moving deliberately near old mining equipment. One figure bent over a broken cart, as though checking its contents, then straightened and walked toward a fallen shaft, disappearing into the shadows. A chill swept through the area, carrying faint sounds of hammering and scraping that seemed to emanate from the darkness of the woods. Marcus felt a sudden awareness of being watched, an intangible presence pressing against the edges of his perception. As he stepped closer to a partially collapsed tunnel, he glimpsed another shadow moving along a timber support beam, vanishing when he attempted to focus on it. The experience left him with a sense of awe and unease, a reminder that Bohemia is a place where the echoes of human toil and tragedy linger beyond death. Other visitors recount similar experiences. Shadowy miners appear along overgrown paths, pacing silently or performing tasks as though oblivious to the living world. Rusted tools are occasionally found in positions that suggest recent use, though no one is there. Faint sounds, indistinct but unmistakable, rise from collapsed tunnels or empty structures, adding to the feeling of being immersed in a world where past and present intersect. Cold drafts sweep through the forest without natural cause, brushing against the skin and heightening the sense of unease. Many interpret these phenomena as the lingering presence of miners trapped in a cycle of labor, repetition, and memory, endlessly replaying moments from lives interrupted by accident or misfortune. The shadowy miners of Bohemia are fleeting but unforgettable. Rarely fully visible, they glide among equipment, pause near shafts, and move along trails with fluid, silent motions. Observers often describe a combination of fear, fascination, and reverence, recognizing them as echoes of the village's history and the lives of those who perished there. Bohemia is not merely a collection of ruins, it is a place where human effort, tragedy, and memory converge, forming a ghostly tableau that persists long after the town was abandoned. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Bohemia awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures move among rusted carts and timbers. The clatter of unseen tools echoes across the forest, and cold drafts sweep through the woods. For anyone exploring this abandoned village, Bohemia is more than a historical curiosity. It is a place where the living encounter the dead, a haunting, beautiful, and unforgettable reminder that the weight of memory and labor can endure beyond life, and that some presences, like the miners of Bohemia, persist forever in shadow and sound. Valsets, located deep in the forests of Polk County, Oregon, is a place where time has been swallowed by the trees. Once a bustling logging town, it thrived amid the thick conifers and dense undergrowth. Its streets lined with wooden cabins, sawmills, and boardwalks. The rhythmic hum of chainsaws, the clatter of falling timber, and the voices of lumberjacks echoed through the valley for decades. Yet, as the logging industry declined and natural disasters took their toll, Valsets was gradually abandoned, leaving behind remnants of homes and businesses slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Today, the town exists only in fragments, fallen cabins hidden under moss, rusted equipment overtaken by vines, and narrow paths where streets once lay. But for those who venture into Valsets after sunset, the town is far from lifeless. Visitors report faint whispers among the ruins, shadowy figures of lumberjacks at work, and an uneasy sense of being watched, as though the forest itself remembers every strike of the axe and every footstep on its wooden floors. The history of Valsets is inseparable from its haunting. The town rose in the early 20th century as logging boomed in the Pacific Northwest. Families moved into hastily built cabins, and loggers spent long days felling massive trees and hauling timber to mills. The town had a rhythm of life dictated by the forest. Sunrise brought the whistle of the sawmill and the clatter of boots on boardwalks, while evenings were filled with laughter, songs, and the occasional argument echoing through cabins. Children played among the logs and along the creek that cut through the town, and the scent of fresh timber lingered in the air. Yet the prosperity was fragile. Fires, storms, and the decline of logging gradually emptied Valsets, leaving it vulnerable to decay and the relentless encroachment of nature. Over time, local legends began to circulate of ghostly lumberjacks continuing their work in the ruins, carrying axes and saws that make no sound, and whispers that drift through the misty forest like fragments of long-forgotten conversations. Visitors to Valsets often describe shadowy figures moving among the fallen cabins and overgrown streets. These figures appear at dusk, tall and indistinct, sometimes carrying tools or swinging invisible axes. They move deliberately, as though fulfilling the routines of a life that has long ended. Some are seen cutting imaginary logs, stacking invisible timber, or inspecting rusted saws, their forms partially transparent, fading into the mist when approached. Others stand silently near collapsed cabins, staring into the forest as if scanning for danger or awaiting the return of someone who will never arrive. The figures rarely interact directly with the living, but their presence is palpable, a heavy sense of history pressing against the present, and those who linger report chills that seem to seep from the very ground and timber around them. Whispers are another hallmark of Valsets' haunting. Even when the forest is still, visitors frequently hear faint murmurs among the ruins, fragments of conversation, laughter, or instructions calling across the clearing. Sometimes these sounds echo across fallen cabins or along narrow paths, as though the town itself is speaking. Occasionally, names are whispered, perhaps of loggers who died young, families who abandoned their homes, or children who played too close to the creek. The auditory phenomena are subtle, yet persistent, creating a sensation of being surrounded by the echoes of daily life that once filled the town. Coupled with the visual apparitions, these whispers heighten the feeling that Valsetz is more than abandoned. It is inhabited by memories, by spirits tied to the routines, joys, and tragedies of a vanished community. One evening, a visitor named Eleanor arrived at Valsetz, drawn by the tales of spectral lumberjacks and eerie whispers. As the sun dipped below the treetops, she wandered along paths overgrown with ferns and moss, stepping carefully over the remnants of boardwalks. In the dim light, she noticed shadowy figures near the remains of an old sawmill, bending as if adjusting unseen machinery. She heard faint, almost imperceptible murmurs drifting across the clearing, broken by what sounded like the distant scrape of a saw blade. A chill swept across her, and she felt a presence nearby, as though someone were observing her every movement. At the edge of the mist, a tall figure swung an invisible axe, paused, and then slowly faded into the fog, leaving Eleanor with an unshakable awareness that the past was still alive in Valsetz. Other visitors recount similar experiences. Shadows pace among overgrown foundations, performing daily routines from decades past. The sound of invisible tools striking wood or stone occasionally rises from the mist. Cold drafts appear without warning, brushing against the skin and heightening the sense of unease. Whispers echo from fallen cabins and along narrow forest paths, sometimes forming unintelligible fragments, sometimes carrying faintly recognizable words. Many interpret these occurrences as the lingering presence of those who labored and lived in Valsetz, caught between worlds, endlessly repeating gestures and actions tied to the town that shaped their lives. The ghostly lumberjacks of Valsetz are fleeting yet unforgettable. Rarely fully visible, they glide among fallen cabins, pause near rusted equipment, and move silently along forested paths. Observers often describe a mixture of fear, fascination, and reverence, recognizing these apparitions as echoes of the town's history and the lives of those who once worked there. Valsetz is not merely a collection of ruins. It is a place where memory and labor persist, a spectral tableau where the past continues to play out in shadows and whispers. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Valsetz awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures pace along overgrown streets. The whispers of long-past conversations drift among the fallen cabins, and cold mists sweep through the ruins. For anyone wandering this forgotten logging town, Valsetz is more than an abandoned settlement. It is a place where the living encounter the lost, a haunting and unforgettable reminder that some presences endure beyond life, and that memory, like the forest reclaiming the town, persists forever. Greenberry, a small settlement tucked into the rolling hills of Benton County, Oregon, is a place where the past lingers like fog over the fields. Once a thriving village with a handful of homes, a general store, and a small church, Greenberry gradually fell into decline as families moved away in search of better opportunities, leaving behind buildings that slowly succumbed to time and weather. Today, only fragments of the village remain, crumbling walls, roofless cabins, and overgrown streets where the echoes of daily life seem to persist. Those who wander among these ruins speak of faint lights flickering in empty windows, shadowy figures glimpsed behind deteriorating walls, and an unsettling feeling that the village is alive with memories of the people who once inhabited it. The history of Greenberry is deeply tied to its haunting. In its heyday, the village was a modest but lively community. Children played in the streets, their laughter ringing across the hills, while villagers gathered for church services, social events, and work in the surrounding fields. Life was dictated by seasons and labor, with days spent tending crops, repairing structures, and caring for livestock. Yet misfortune gradually seeped into Greenberry. Economic hardship, isolated location, and the allure of cities drew families away. Buildings were abandoned, fences rotted, and streets fell silent. Over time, locals began speaking in hushed tones about the spirits of Greenberry. The faint lights that seemed to glow in empty rooms, and the figures glimpsed through crumbling walls, as if the villagers' presence could not be erased. Visitors to Greenberry often describe shadowy figures moving behind broken windows and through gaps in the decaying structures. These forms are fleeting, sometimes just glimpsed at the edge of vision, moving with a quiet purpose. Some appear in the doorway of a collapsed home, standing motionless for a moment before fading into shadow. Others are seen walking along overgrown paths, their shapes blurred and indistinct, disappearing when approached. They are almost always human in form, their outlines suggesting villagers going about routines that ended decades ago. Yet their presence is ethereal, as if memory itself has taken shape. The faint lights that appear in the village are another eerie aspect of Greenberry. Visitors report small, flickering lights in windows of abandoned homes or near the remnants of the general store. The lights appear without source, glowing intermittently, and sometimes moving from one building to another. At times, they seem to follow the observer, appearing just out of reach, then vanishing when approached directly. Some interpret the lights as remnants of the villagers' spirits, still tending to their homes, or as warnings to outsiders that the village is watched. Others believe they are echoes of everyday life, moments of domestic routine replaying themselves like a ghostly projection of the past. Whispers and murmurs are often reported among the ruins of Greenberry. Even when the forest is still, faint voices can be heard drifting from the shadows, conversations in indistinct tones, the laughter of children, or the murmur of adults engaged in work or discussion. These sounds rarely form complete words, but are recognizable as human in origin. Some visitors hear calls that seem to beckon them further into the village, while others feel as if the whispers are warnings, urging them to leave. The auditory phenomena, combined with the visual manifestations of figures and lights, creating an atmosphere that is both captivating and unnerving. A reminder that Greenberry is more than a collection of abandoned buildings. It is a repository of memory, grief, and lingering presence. One evening, a visitor named Clara arrived at Greenberry, drawn by the stories of ghostly lights and shadowy villagers. As twilight descended, she wandered carefully among the overgrown streets, stepping over roots and fallen beams. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing in the doorway of a partially collapsed cabin. It was tall, indistinct, yet unmistakably human. She paused, and the figure seemed to shift, moving slowly along the interior of the structure. At the same time, a faint, flickering light appeared in a nearby window, moving from side to side as if tracing the outline of the room. Clara felt a chill sweep across her, a cold that seemed to emanate from the very foundations. When she stepped closer, both the figure and the light vanished, leaving her alone in the silent, overgrown street. Yet with the sense that she had witnessed something timeless, a fragment of life replaying itself decades after the village had been abandoned. Other visitors report similar experiences. Shadowy figures appear near overgrown fences, pacing along the remnants of streets, or gliding through the hollowed interiors of buildings. Flickering lights appear in windows, or hover just above the ground, and soft whispers drift from crumbling walls, sometimes forming fleeting words or names. Cold drafts sweep through the ruins without warning, heightening the sense that the village is alive with unseen presence. Many interpret these phenomena as the lingering spirits of villagers caught between memory and reality, endlessly repeating gestures and routines from a life that no longer exists. The ghostly villagers of Greenberry are fleeting but unforgettable, rarely fully visible. They move through broken structures, appear at windows, and vanish into shadows. Observers often describe a mix of fear, wonder, and reverence, recognizing the figures as echoes of the people who once lived and worked in the village. Greenberry is not merely a site of ruins, it is a place where memory, loss, and presence converge. The shadows and lights that fill the village are reminders that some stories, some lives, and some presences endure beyond abandonment. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Greenberry awakens in its quiet, spectral rhythm. Shadowy villagers appear among crumbling walls, Faint lights flicker in empty windows, and whispers drift across overgrown streets. For anyone wandering the ruins of this forgotten village, Greenberry is more than an abandoned settlement. Farney, a small village hidden deep within the dense forests of Douglas County, Oregon, is a place where the boundary between the living and the spectral seems thin. Once a modest settlement, Farney thrived amid towering pines and fog-laden hills. Families built cabins along winding paths, raised livestock, and tended small farms, while hunters and trappers ventured into the surrounding woods. Life in Farney was isolated, but the community was close-knit. The smoke of wood fires drifted from chimneys each morning, lanterns glowed in windows at dusk, and the rhythmic sounds of daily labor, the chopping of wood, the creak of carts, the laughter of children filled the air. But over time, the village was abandoned, overtaken by the forest, and left to decay. Today, visitors who stumble upon Farney find crumbling cabins, moss-covered pathways, and an eerie silence that seems too thick to be natural. Yet the village is not entirely empty. Phantom animals roam the woods, shadowy figures of villagers appear, and faint fires flicker in abandoned hearths, creating a haunting tableau of life frozen in time. Farney's history is essential to understanding its ghostly reputation. Founded in the late 19th century, the village prospered on timber, small-scale farming, and hunting. Its residents were resilient, carving a life from the dense wilderness, yet nature and isolation were relentless. Harsh winters, sudden storms, and the ever-present danger of fire or disease left their mark on the community. Gradually, younger generations moved away to seek work and opportunity elsewhere. Houses and shops were abandoned, paths grew over with ferns and moss, and the village slowly vanished from the maps. But local folklore suggests that the people of Farney never truly left. Stories emerged of wandering spirits, shadowy figures glimpsed through broken windows, phantom animals moving silently through the woods, and the flicker of fires burning in hearths long cold. Explorers and hikers recount experiences that suggest the village's energy, its memories, and its life persist in spectral form. Visitors often describe strange phenomena when venturing into Farney, beginning with the ghostly animals. Deer, wolves, and even domestic dogs are reported wandering through the forest and the village streets. Yet, when approached, they vanish into the mist. These animals are described as having ethereal qualities, translucent coats, faintly glowing eyes, and movements that are unnervingly silent. Some observers have reported packs of spectral wolves circling abandoned cabins or phantom cats weaving between fallen fences, always just beyond reach. Their presence adds a sense of life to the abandoned village, yet it is a life tinged with otherworldly unease. A reminder that Farney is haunted not just by its human past, but by the wildness that once defined it. Human apparitions are another frequent sight. Shadowy figures move along overgrown paths, pausing by the remains of cabins or near rusted tools and wagons. Some appear to be performing daily tasks from long ago, tending invisible fires, carrying buckets of water, or checking doors and windows. Others are more fleeting, glimpsed in peripheral vision, only to vanish when directly observed. Witnesses describe the figures as vaguely human in form but indistinct, their outlines blurred as if woven from mist. They do not speak directly, but sometimes gesture or pause, giving the impression of recognition or curiosity, as though aware of the living wandering among them. One of the most eerie aspects of Farney is the appearance of ghostly fires. Visitors frequently report faint glows flickering within hearths of abandoned cabins. The flames do not produce heat or smoke, yet they illuminate the interior, revealing long-deserted furniture, tools, and the remnants of daily life. Some say the fires seem to respond to their presence, flaring briefly when approached, and then dimming or vanishing entirely. The origin of these lights remains unexplained. Some interpret them as memories of life and warmth, persisting in spectral form, while others see them as warnings, signals from the past meant to guide or caution the living. Whispers often accompany the apparitions in Farney. Even in the deepest silence, visitors report hearing voices drifting through the forest and village ruins. These murmurs can be faint instructions, fragments of conversation, or indistinct calls that echo across the trees and broken cabins. Occasionally, explorers hear their own names, spoken softly, as if acknowledged by unseen inhabitants. The combination of whispers, phantom animals, and glowing hearths creates an immersive and unnerving experience, leaving a strong impression that Farney is alive in a way the living cannot fully comprehend. One evening, a visitor named Thomas arrived at Farney, drawn by the stories of ghostly villagers and phantom animals. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he wandered along moss-covered streets, stepping over fallen boards and broken fences. A deer appeared at the edge of a clearing, its coat pale and eyes faintly luminescent. When Thomas moved closer, the animal vanished into the mist, leaving only the faint scent of pine and earth. Near the remains of the old general store, he saw a shadowy figure tending an invisible fire in a stone hearth. Flames flickered weakly, illuminating the figure's blurred outline, then disappeared when he tried to approach. From the woods, a faint whisper carried his name, soft and urgent, drifting through the trees and adding to the chill that ran through him. The experience left Thomas with a sense of awe, fear, and reverence. A reminder that Farney is a place where memory, presence, and nature converge in ways both beautiful and unsettling. Other visitors recount similar encounters: shadowy villagers moving through overgrown paths, ghostly animals appearing and disappearing in the mist, fires flickering in abandoned hearths, and whispers drifting through the ruins. Cold drafts sweep across streets that no longer exist, and faint sounds of footsteps follow explorers along the forested trails. Many interpret these experiences as the enduring presence of the villagers and wildlife, tied to the land they inhabited and the routines of daily life that persist in spectral form. Night after night, and again at first light, Farney awakens in its ghostly rhythm. Shadowy villagers move along overgrown streets. Phantom animals roam the forest. Ghostly fires flicker in long-abandoned hearths, and whispers drift across the ruins. For anyone exploring this forgotten village, Farney is more than an abandoned settlement. It is a place where memory, life, and presence endure. A haunting reminder that some echoes cannot be silenced, and that even in decay, the spirit of a village remains. Foreman, a forgotten village nestled deep in the forests of Josephine County, Oregon, is a place where the line between the living and the past seems almost non-existent. Once a modest settlement, Foreman thrived for a time, with families living in simple wooden homes, tending gardens, and working in nearby mills and orchards. Children ran through the streets, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic sound of tools and the creak of wagon wheels along dirt roads. The village had a quiet vitality, defined by seasonal routines, the hum of domestic life, and the occasional social gathering at the town square or church. Over time, however, Foreman fell into decline. Economic hardship, migration to larger towns, and the steady encroachment of the forest led residents to abandon their homes. Today, little remains: crumbling foundations, empty streets overgrown with grass and weeds, and the skeletal frames of old wells. Yet, those who venture into Foreman report that the village is far from empty. Faint voices echo through the trees, footsteps sound on deserted paths, and shadowy figures appear at old wells or among the ruins of demolished homes, vanishing when approached. The history of Foreman is etched into the very land, and it seems to resist complete erasure. The village began as a small agricultural and milling settlement, its residents carving a life from the dense Oregon forests. Cabins were constructed of timber from nearby trees, and simple roads connected homes, farms, and mills. Life was hard but steady, governed by the cycles of planting, harvesting, and tending livestock. Children played in the streets, sometimes chasing each other across wooden bridges or along the banks of a nearby creek. Neighbors gathered for work, celebrations, and community events, creating a sense of belonging that made the village feel alive and enduring. Yet misfortune and isolation slowly chipped away at Foreman's vitality. Families left in search of opportunity elsewhere. The mills shut down, and houses were abandoned to the forest. Nature reclaimed the village, but in doing so, it left echoes, footsteps, whispers, and apparitions that continue to haunt the land. Visitors to Foreman often recount strange and unsettling experiences. One of the most common phenomena is the sound of footsteps in empty streets. Even when no living person is present, explorers hear the distinct rhythm of shoes or boots moving over dirt, gravel, or wooden planks. The footsteps sometimes follow visitors, maintaining a distance but always present, then vanish suddenly, leaving only silence. Some hear multiple sets of steps, as if several people are moving along the abandoned streets. Their presence, both invisible and undeniable. This auditory haunting creates an eerie awareness that the village is not entirely uninhabited, and that the daily routines of life long past are replayed invisibly for those willing to observe. Faint voices are another common occurrence in Foreman. Visitors often report hearing names called softly, sometimes repeated as if in conversation or in warning. The tones vary, occasionally gentle and nostalgic, at other times urgent or sorrowful. These whispers drift through the ruins, seeming to emerge from demolished homes, empty streets, or old wells. They rarely form complete sentences, but the fragments are recognizable as human communication, lending the impression that the village itself remembers the lives and interactions of its former residents. Shadowy figures are perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Foreman's haunting. Observers have seen vague silhouettes moving among the foundations of demolished homes, near old wells, or along overgrown paths. These figures are rarely detailed. They appear as dark shapes, vaguely human in form, sometimes pausing as if tending to invisible tasks. Others seem to walk the streets, disappearing into the fog or the shadows of the trees when approached. Some figures are glimpsed at dawn or dusk, their forms illuminated briefly by the light filtering through the forest, only to fade instantly into the ruins. Witnesses describe a sense of being watched, or even acknowledged, by these apparitions, as though the spirits of Foreman, as former residents, continue to inhabit the spaces they once knew intimately. One visitor, a young man named Marcus, arrived at Foreman on a foggy evening, drawn by local stories of haunted footsteps and shadowy figures. As he walked along the narrow, overgrown streets, he heard faint footsteps behind him, soft but deliberate, echoing over the ground. Turning, he saw nothing, only the skeletal remains of houses and fences draped in vines. At the edge of a clearing, near the remnants of a stone well, he glimpsed a shadowy figure, its outline human but indistinct. Marcus froze, and the figure paused, as if observing him, before slowly fading into the mist. From the ruins of a nearby cabin came the faint murmur of a voice, whispering a single word, his name carried gently on the wind. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the village was alive in a way he could neither fully see nor comprehend, its memory and presence lingering in forms both seen and unseen. Other visitors recount similar experiences. Shadowy figures pace overgrown paths, pause near ruined homes, and vanish before being fully recognized. Faint voices echo across streets and among trees, calling names or uttering fragments of long-past conversations. Footsteps follow explorers through the village, sometimes multiple sets at once, vanishing without warning. The combined effect of these experiences creates an environment where the past persists, a village caught between decay and memory, where human presence continues to imprint itself on the land long after the living have departed. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Foreman awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures move among ruins, whispers drift through overgrown streets, and the sound of footsteps echoes across empty foundations. For anyone wandering this abandoned village, Foreman is more than a collection of crumbling buildings. It is a haunting, living reminder that memory, presence, and the echoes of daily life endure beyond human departure, and that some settlements never truly fall silent, even when all who once lived there are gone. Waldo School ruins, nestled deep in the forests of Lincoln County, Oregon, is a place where time seems to linger, refusing to release the echoes of the past. Once a modest one-room schoolhouse serving the children of a small logging village, it now stands abandoned, its wooden walls rotting, windows shattered, and roof partially collapsed. Despite its decay, the ruins retain an unsettling presence, as if the memories of students, teachers, and daily lessons are imprinted upon the structure itself. Visitors report strange phenomena, ghostly children reenacting lessons long forgotten, whispers echoing through the surrounding forest, and shadowy figures peering through broken windows, watching the living with hollowed eyes. The ruins are both haunting and poignant, a reminder that even the simplest places of learning can carry the weight of memory beyond death. The history of Waldo School is inseparable from its haunting. Founded in the early 1900s, it served the children of a thriving logging community. Families relied on the school not only for education but also as a center for social gatherings and events. The structure was simple: a single room lined with wooden desks, a blackboard at the front, and a small wood stove to ward off winter's chill. Children walked from nearby cabins and farms each morning, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Teachers often lived nearby, dedicating their lives to the education of these remote children. Lessons included reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical knowledge necessary for life in the rugged, forested region. Despite the hardships of rural life, the school was a place of warmth and routine, where the rhythms of education punctuated daily existence. When the logging industry declined and families moved away, the school fell silent. Without students and teachers, the building gradually succumbed to the elements. Wooden walls splintered, the roof caved in, and windows shattered, leaving gaping holes through which wind and rain penetrated. Trees and brush overtook the yard, and the quiet of the forest settled over the ruins. Yet, the energy of the place remained, as if the lessons, laughter, and discipline of the past could not be erased. Locals began reporting strange occurrences: faint giggles, footsteps on rotting floors, and shadows glimpsed through broken windows. Stories spread of ghostly children continuing their studies long after the living had departed, their spectral forms reliving the routines of a life interrupted. Visitors to the Waldo School ruins often describe seeing ghostly children moving among the debris. At dawn, when the forest is draped in mist, the figures appear most vividly. Some observers report children seated at invisible desks, heads bent over spectral books, or raising hands to answer questions that have long gone unasked. Others see figures moving across the floor as if participating in an unseen lesson, walking from one corner to another, opening and closing doors that no longer exist. These apparitions are typically faint, almost translucent, but their movements are deliberate and unmistakably human, creating a sense that the past is replaying itself for anyone willing to watch. Whispers are another common feature of the haunting. Explorers frequently hear faint voices drifting through the forest surrounding the ruins. At times, the voices echo names, recite fragments of lessons, or murmur simple instructions like sit down or pay attention. The whispers seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, through broken windows, from the forest floor, or above the collapsed roof, creating an immersive auditory presence that heightens the sense of otherworldliness. These sounds are often reported in the early morning or at dusk, when fog and shadow obscure the boundaries between ruin and forest, amplifying the feeling that the school is inhabited by unseen pupils. Shadowy figures also appear, often peeking through the broken windows or lingering near the foundations of the building. These forms are darker and more amorphous than the ghostly children, giving them an ominous presence. Sometimes they resemble teachers or adults supervising the spectral students, their figures tall and slightly distorted, watching silently from the periphery. Observers describe a mix of curiosity and unease when confronted with these figures, a sense of being both acknowledged and warned by presences that exist on a different plane of reality. One evening, a visitor named Claire explored the ruins, drawn by local tales of ghostly lessons and spectral children. As she approached, she noticed the faint outline of a small figure moving across the forest floor near the schoolhouse. At first, she thought it was a deer or a passerby, but the figure stopped and raised a tiny hand, as if answering a question from an unseen teacher. Claire's heart raced as she stepped closer, and the form dissolved into mist. From the shadowed interior of the building came the faint murmur of voices, indistinct words, repeating a rhyme or lesson she could not place. She shivered as the echoes of children's footsteps moved across the decayed floorboards, vanishing when she tried to follow them. The experience left her with an overwhelming sense of the persistence of memory, the haunting presence of those who once filled the space with life, and the impossibility of fully comprehending the past. Other visitors recount similar experiences. Ghostly children repeating their daily routines, whispers drifting across the ruins, shadowy figures observing from broken windows, and sudden chills that sweep through the forest. Some report feeling an invisible presence beside them, or a sense of eyes watching from the tree line. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile phenomena creates a hauntingly immersive environment, one in which the past is never fully gone, but continues to exist alongside the living. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Waldo School ruins awakens in its spectral rhythm. Ghostly children enact long-forgotten lessons. Shadowy figures linger near the building's edges, and whispers drift through the surrounding forest. For anyone who ventures into these ruins, Waldo School is more than an abandoned structure. It is a living memory, a place where the echoes of life, learning, and innocence endure long after the last student has left, and where the spirit of education persists in forms both visible and unseen. Pottersville, a long-forgotten logging village in Clackamas County, Oregon, stands as a testament to both human industry and the persistence of memory. Once a bustling hub for timber workers, the village thrived amid the dense forests, with cabins, sawmills, and supply stores forming a tight-knit community. Men labored from dawn until dusk, wielding axes and saws to harvest the surrounding trees, while women tended homes, gardens, and small livestock. Children played along the narrow streets, weaving between piles of lumber and carts, their laughter mingling with the clatter of machinery and the rhythmic pounding of axes on wood. The village had a vibrancy that seemed inseparable from the towering pines and firs surrounding it. Yet, as the forests were exhausted and logging operations became less profitable, families left in search of new opportunities, and Pottersville was gradually abandoned. Today, only the remnants of cabins, foundations, and rusted mill equipment remain, yet the village is far from silent. Visitors report shadowy figures moving among the ruins, phantom sounds of axes striking wood, and the uncanny feeling that the labor of the past continues to unfold invisibly among the trees. The history of Pottersville is etched deeply into the landscape. Established in the early 20th century, the village served as a center for logging operations in the region. Timber was harvested not only for local use, but also for shipment to nearby towns and cities, supporting Oregon's growing economy. The work was grueling, often dangerous, and deeply communal. Workers relied on each other to fell massive trees, transport logs, and process lumber in sawmills. The rhythm of life was dictated by the forest and the mill. Mornings began with the calls of workers gathering tools, the sound of axes hitting wood, and the low hum of saws cutting timber, while evenings brought rest meals and occasional gatherings around communal fires. Pottersville was more than a workplace. It was home, community, and lifeblood. As the logging industry declined, Pottersville's fate was sealed. Families moved on, leaving empty cabins, abandoned stores, and idle machinery. But while the living departed, the energy of human labor remained. Visitors to the site report an unsettling persistence of the past. Shadowy figures are seen gliding silently among the trees or along the remnants of streets and foundations. Often, they resemble workers in period clothing, men in suspenders and work shirts, sometimes carrying invisible tools, moving as if engaged in tasks long past. Their movements are deliberate but fleeting. When approached, they vanish as if absorbed into the forest itself. Auditory phenomena add to the haunting of Pottersville. The most frequently reported sounds are the clatter of axes striking wood, saws whirring, and the rhythmic pounding of hammers, all seemingly emanating from nowhere. Some visitors have described the experience as immersive, hearing the distinct echoes of logging operations, as though the village's past has been replayed for anyone who enters. These phantom sounds are often accompanied by the faint murmur of voices, perhaps workers communicating instructions. laughter from children playing, or even the low tones of supervisors calling out commands. The sounds are never constant, but appear in waves, sometimes fading into silence only to return moments later, creating a sense of temporal dislocation where past and present coexist uneasily. Fog and mist often envelop the ruins, enhancing their spectral quality. Visitors arriving early in the morning or at twilight report seeing figures emerge from the fog, moving along forest paths, stopping to strike invisible logs, or walking among the ruins before fading into the shadows. The interplay of light, mist, and shadow makes the apparitions difficult to define. Their presence is felt as much as it is seen. Trees and remnants of cabins seem to frame the figures naturally, giving the impression that the village itself is participating in the haunting, preserving the memory of work and life in its silent, decaying structures. One evening, a man named Thomas explored Pottersville as the sun sank behind the forested hills. He followed a narrow path between old foundations, where moss-covered timbers lay scattered. As he walked, he heard the unmistakable sound of an axe striking wood, followed by the low rumble of a saw. The sound seemed to come from a clearing ahead. Thomas paused and saw a dark figure in the fog, swinging an invisible axe at an unseen log. Nearby, another shadow moved deliberately, hammering a phantom piece of timber into place. Thomas felt the hairs on his neck rise as he realized he was witnessing the labor of long-dead villagers, their routines continuing in a parallel reality. When he took a cautious step forward, the figures dissipated into the fog, leaving only the faint echoes of machinery and the scent of pine. He felt an overwhelming mix of awe, fear, and reverence, aware that the village's memory persisted despite the absence of living souls. Other visitors have shared similar experiences. Shadowy figures pacing along foundations, phantom axes chopping in the mist, the distant echo of saws, and whispers carried on the wind. The ruins themselves seem to retain the energy of labor and life, creating a space where the past and present collide. Some explorers report fleeting glimpses of children playing among the ruins, perhaps replaying moments of childhood long gone, while others feel an unseen presence guiding or observing their movements. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile phenomena makes Pottersville a uniquely immersive and haunting location. Night after night, and again at the first light of dawn, Pottersville awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy workers appear among ruins, phantom machinery clatters in the mist, and whispers drift through the trees. For anyone wandering this abandoned logging village, Pottersville is more than a decaying settlement. It is a living memory, a place where the persistence of human labor, presence, and community continues to echo long after the last resident has gone. A haunting testament to the life and work that once defined it. Mapleton Ghost Village, hidden deep within the forests of Lane County, Oregon, is a place where history and haunting intertwine, leaving a lingering sense of life, once vibrant and now suspended between memory and decay. Once a small but thriving settlement, Mapleton was home to families who worked the land, tended small businesses, and raised children among the towering firs and maples that still dominate the landscape today. Wooden homes, a modest schoolhouse, a general store, and a church formed the heart of the village, where daily life followed the natural rhythms of work and community. Children's laughter once echoed through the streets, mingling with the songs of neighbors, the calls of farmers, and the creak of wagons along dirt paths. But as economic hardship, declining resources, and the pull of larger towns caused families to leave, Mapleton fell silent. Today, the village exists only in ruins, moss-covered foundations, crumbling walls, and scattered remnants of a past that refuses to be forgotten. Visitors report ghostly voices singing, the laughter of children carried on the wind, and shadowy forms appearing near broken foundations, vanishing when approached, as though the village itself has become a vessel for memory and lingering spirits. The history of Mapleton is deeply intertwined with the land. Settlers arrived in the late 19th century, drawn by fertile soil and abundant timber. They carved out a living from the forests and fields, raising crops, tending orchards, and harvesting timber for construction and trade. The village grew around these industries, fostering a tight-knit community where everyone knew one another. Children attended the small schoolhouse, learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, while also helping with chores and caring for younger siblings. Sundays brought services at the church, community gatherings, and music, often featuring the harmonies of local voices singing hymns or folk songs. Life in Mapleton was hard but meaningful, structured by labor, family, and community connections. Yet even in this idyllic setting, the village was vulnerable to the forces of change. Fires, economic downturns, and the allure of opportunities elsewhere gradually emptied Mapleton, leaving the physical structures to crumble and the memories to linger. The haunting of Mapleton is subtle yet pervasive. Visitors frequently report hearing ghostly voices carried on the wind, often singing songs that seem both familiar and impossibly distant. Sometimes these are hymns from the church, other times children's rhymes or lullabies, echoing as if from open windows or down deserted streets. The sounds are never constant, appearing in waves and often fading when one tries to locate their source. Alongside these voices, the laughter of children is a common phenomenon. Heard in the ruins of the schoolyard or near foundations of former homes, the laughter is fleeting, sometimes approaching with clarity before fading into the ambient sounds of the forest, creating a disorienting sense of presence that blurs the line between memory and reality. Shadowy forms are another frequent manifestation. Observers describe figures appearing near crumbling foundations, moving silently among the ruins, or drifting along overgrown paths. These shapes often resemble adults and children from the village's past, small figures running or playing, taller figures watching over them, and others moving as though performing chores or daily routines. When approached, these forms vanish, leaving only the whisper of wind through the trees or the faint scent of wood and earth. At times, multiple figures appear together, suggesting social interaction or family life, while other times they move alone, quietly retracing routines long abandoned by the living. Fog and mist, common in this part of Oregon, enhance the ghostly quality of Mapleton. During early mornings or late afternoons, a thin veil of mist blankets the village ruins, softening the edges of broken walls and foundations. Within this mist, shadowy figures seem to materialize from nothing, moving along paths that have long since returned to nature. The combination of visual distortion, eerie sounds, and the forest's natural silence creates an atmosphere where visitors feel both seen and unseen, as if the village itself is aware of their presence. This interplay of light, shadow, and sound gives the impression that Mapleton's residents have never truly left, continuing to live in a parallel reality that overlaps with the world of the living. One evening, a visitor named Samuel arrived at Mapleton as the sun dipped below the western hills. Walking along the mossy remains of old streets, he heard the faint strains of a song drifting through the trees. Curious, he followed the sound to a clearing where the foundations of the church and schoolhouse intersected. There, he glimpsed shadowy forms, a small group of children gathered near the crumbling walls, swaying as if singing together, and a taller figure standing nearby, observing. Samuel took a cautious step forward, and the figures dissolved into mist, leaving only the fading echoes of song and laughter. The experience left him with an unsettling mix of awe, fear, and reverence, a feeling that he had witnessed a fragment of life preserved beyond death. Replaying in a place untouched by time, other visitors recount similar experiences. Ghostly voices carried on the wind, the laughter of children echoing across ruined foundations, and shadowy figures vanishing into mist. Some report feeling unseen presences, guiding their steps along old paths, while others feel a cold brush against their skin or the subtle sensation of being watched. The combination of auditory, visual, and sensory phenomena creates an immersive experience, making Mapleton Ghost Village not just a site of ruins but a living memory, where the essence of community, work, and childhood endures in spectral form. Night after night, and again at first light, Mapleton awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures move among ruins, ghostly voices sing across empty streets, and children's laughter echoes through the trees. For anyone who ventures here, Mapleton Ghost Village is far more than an abandoned settlement. It is a haunting preservation of life once lived, a place where memory and spirit endure, and a reminder that even after a village is emptied and forgotten, its echoes of joy, labor, and innocence can persist, visible and audible to those who dare to listen. Valset's Forest Settlement, deep in the remote forests of Poquet County, Oregon, is a place where the boundaries between past and present blur, leaving the living to encounter the echoes of lives once vibrant. Originally established in the early 20th century as a logging community, Valset's was a cluster of cabins, mills, and supply structures built to support the workers and their families who carved a living from the dense forests. Men labored tirelessly, felling towering firs and pines, transporting massive logs, and processing timber in rudimentary sawmills. Women managed households, gardens, and children, creating a rhythm of life that intertwined with the pulse of the forest. Over time, small schools and communal spaces were established, where children learned reading, arithmetic, and practical knowledge, and neighbors gathered to celebrate holidays or simply share stories after a long day of work. Life in Valset's was defined by labor, community, and an intimate connection to the surrounding wilderness. Yet, as the forest resources dwindled and the logging industry shifted, the settlement declined. Families left in search of opportunity elsewhere, leaving cabins to rot and streets to be reclaimed by the forest. Over decades, moss and ivy covered foundations, chimneys crumbled, and the wind carried the scent of pine and decay through the ruins. Though the living departed, the energy of the settlement remained, and Valset's gradually earned a reputation among locals as haunted. Visitors recount eerie experiences, whispers floating through the trees, shadowy figures moving among abandoned cabins, and the faint scent of smoke from fires that had long been extinguished. These phenomena suggest that the past lives of Valset's inhabitants linger, replaying fragments of their daily existence in a spectral loop. The history of Valset's Forest Settlement is inseparable from the haunting. Established around 1910, the settlement was constructed to house loggers and their families near the abundant timber of Poquet County. The cabins were small but sturdy, built of local wood and arranged along dirt paths that threaded through the forest. Central to the community were a sawmill, a general store, and a small schoolhouse. Children's laughter filled the air during the day, echoing through the trees as they learned, played, and helped with chores. Evenings brought gatherings near fireplaces, where families shared meals and stories. Life was arduous but structured, a rhythm of work and rest dictated by necessity and community ties. When the logging industry waned, however, the settlement could not sustain itself. Families abandoned their homes, leaving behind personal belongings, tools, and remnants of daily life, all of which were slowly reclaimed by nature. Visitors today often report hearing faint whispers drifting through the forest, sometimes repeating fragments of conversations or names. These sounds are often described as soft and distant, yet clear enough to cause unease. Some say the whispers carry instructions or warnings, perhaps remnants of logging commands, parents calling children, or neighbors exchanging news. They appear most frequently near the foundations of cabins or the remnants of the schoolhouse, where the concentration of past activity was highest. The auditory phenomena are unpredictable, sometimes appearing in brief bursts, other times lingering for minutes, creating an uncanny sense that the settlement's past is still interacting with the present. Shadowy figures are a common element of Valset's haunting. Visitors report seeing silhouettes moving between trees, along old paths, or near the ruins of cabins and mills. These figures are often fleeting, vanishing when approached, but their movements suggest purpose. Some appear to perform tasks, bending to lift invisible logs or adjusting unseen tools. Others wander aimlessly, as if retracing steps once familiar in life. Occasionally, figures resembling children have been observed near overgrown foundations, running or playing in patterns reminiscent of long-forgotten routines. The combination of shadowy forms and natural mist creates an impression that the forest itself preserves the memory of Valset's. animating the ruins with the energy of the past. The faint scent of smoke is another frequently reported phenomenon. Visitors have described walking along overgrown paths and suddenly catching the smell of burning wood, as if a fire had been freshly lit in one of the long-abandoned cabins. The odor is often strongest near chimneys or hearths, adding to the sensation that life continues invisibly among the ruins. This presence of smoke, combined with whispers and shadowy figures, creates a multi-sensory haunting, enveloping visitors in a world where past and present converged. One evening, a visitor named Eleanor wandered through Valsets just as twilight settled over the forest. She approached the remnants of a cabin, its walls partially collapsed and windows empty. From within, she heard the faint creak of timber and the soft murmur of voices. Peering into the shadows, she caught the glimpse of a figure moving deliberately, as if carrying out a task long since abandoned. In the distance, another shadow flickered near the foundations of a neighboring cabin. Eleanor stepped closer, and both figures dissolved into the mist, leaving only the faint scent of smoke and the echo of whispered words. She shivered, realizing she had been witness to the continuation of life in spectral form, an unbroken loop of memory preserved by the ruins themselves. Other visitors described similar experiences. Whispers floating through the forest, shadowy figures performing phantom tasks, and the sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The haunting of Valsets is not violent, but rather a persistent echo of a community that once lived and labored here. It is a place where time has layered, allowing the past to intrude upon the present, creating an immersive, eerie, and poignant experience for anyone who wanders through the ruins. Night after night, and again at first light, Valset's forest settlement awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures move among the cabins, whispers drift through the trees, and the scent of long-extinguished fires lingers in the air. For anyone who explores the ruins, Valsets is more than an abandoned logging village. It is a living memory, a haunting testament to the daily lives, labor, and community that once thrived here, preserved in spectral form and waiting for those willing to witness the echoes of a vanished world. Pine Grove Village, nestled deep within the forests of Douglas County, Oregon, is a place where the past refuses to be silent. Once a small, thriving settlement, the village consisted of wooden homes, a schoolhouse, a general store, and a modest town hall. Families lived and worked here, carving out a life amid towering pines. With narrow dirt streets connecting the cabins and communal areas, children ran freely along the roads, their laughter mingling with the calls of neighbors and the occasional clatter of tools from workshops or logging operations. The rhythm of life was simple but demanding: work at dawn, chores and schooling through the day, communal meals and gatherings at dusk. Pine Grove Village was a tightly knit community where every face was familiar, and the pulse of the forest intertwined with human activity. As time passed, the village fell into decline. Economic hardship, dwindling resources, and the lure of larger towns drew families away. Homes were abandoned, streets grew over with weeds, and nature began reclaiming the area. Trees sprouted along once clear paths, vines crept up wooden walls, and moss softened the edges of foundations. Though the living departed, Pine Grove Village left a lasting imprint, a memory embedded in the landscape, carrying with it the echoes of those who had once called it home. Visitors today report a haunting presence that permeates the forest, phantom footsteps echoing along overgrown paths, shadowy figures moving silently through the ruins, and an overwhelming sense that the village itself remembers its inhabitants. The history of Pine Grove Village is woven into its haunting. Established in the early 20th century, it served as a home for families who worked the surrounding forests, farming small plots of land and engaging in light logging to support the community. Life was communal, structured, and intertwined with the natural world. The schoolhouse was a hub for children, where lessons were taught alongside guidance in practical skills, while the general store provided essential goods and a place for social interaction. Families celebrated holidays together, shared meals, and gathered for music and storytelling in the evenings. Even in the face of hardship, there was a rhythm to life that left a lasting imprint. When the settlement emptied, That imprint did not vanish. Instead, it lingered, manifesting in ways that visitors now describe as haunting. Phantom footsteps are among the most commonly reported phenomena. Visitors walking along the village's overgrown paths often hear the soft crunch of shoes on dirt or leaves. Footsteps that appear deliberate, yet vanish when approached. These sounds may move ahead of visitors, behind them, or circle in unpredictable patterns, creating a disorienting sense of presence. Some have reported hearing multiple sets of footsteps, suggesting the ghostly continuation of social interactions or work routines. Occasionally, these auditory experiences are accompanied by the creak of wooden doors or the faint groan of timber, reinforcing the impression that the village's buildings still house invisible occupants. Shadowy figures are another frequent manifestation. Visitors have seen silhouettes resembling villagers moving along streets, pausing near foundations, or walking toward areas where homes once stood. The figures often appear in period clothing, suggesting the attire of early 20th century villagers, and move with purpose, tending to invisible chores, observing the paths, or interacting with one another. When approached, the figures vanish seamlessly into the surrounding forest, leaving only the echo of movement and the subtle sensation of eyes watching. Some visitors describe fleeting glimpses of children running along the old streets, playing among ruins or peeking from behind tree trunks, only to dissolve into mist when noticed. The interplay of shadow, light, and movement creates an immersive experience that blurs the line between memory and reality. The environment itself seems to enhance the haunting. Pine forests, dense underbrush, and creeping fog often shroud the village in an otherworldly atmosphere. In the early morning or late afternoon, mist rises along the paths, softening the edges of broken foundations and fallen cabins. Within this veil, shadowy forms appear with heightened clarity, their movements amplified by the interplay of light and fog. The ambient sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, calls of birds, and occasional wind through the pines intertwine with phantom footsteps and whispers, creating a multisensory experience that draws visitors into the village's spectral past. One visitor, a historian named Leela, recounted her experience at Pine Grove. Arriving at dusk, she followed an overgrown path that had once connected the town hall and the general store. As she walked, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her, soft but deliberate, pacing in rhythm with her own. Glancing to her left, she saw a shadowy figure pause near a moss-covered foundation, then slowly step into the trees. Further down the path, another shape emerged, small and childlike, running along the old street before disappearing into the mist. The combination of sight and sound left Lila with a profound sense that she was witnessing a replay of daily life, frozen in time, yet unfolding invisibly around her. Other visitors have shared similar experiences. Phantom footsteps tracing old streets, shadowy villagers tending invisible chores, children playing along overgrown paths, and the subtle feeling of being observed. The haunting of Pine Grove is quiet but pervasive, a persistent echo of life once lived, preserved in the ruins and the surrounding forest. It is not violent or threatening, but rather a reminder of the continuity of memory, the endurance of place, and the lingering presence of those who once called this village home. Night after night, and again at dawn, Pine Grove Village awakens in its spectral rhythm. Shadowy figures move among foundations and along forest paths. Phantom footsteps echo softly on overgrown trails, and the sense of unseen presence pervades the air. For those who wander here, Pine Grove is more than an abandoned village. It is a living memory, a haunting preservation of community, work, and childhood, where the past continues to unfold in whispers, shadows, and footsteps, waiting for anyone willing to witness the echoes of a long-forgotten world. Antelope Ghost Village in Wasco County, Oregon, sits quietly beneath the wide, open sky, a relic of a bygone era where the echoes of human activity still seem to linger. Established in the mid-19th century as a pioneer settlement, Antelope was a modest community, built to serve families seeking opportunity in the untamed desert lands. Wooden cabins, a small general store, a schoolhouse, and a few barns clustered along dusty streets, while corrals and fences marked the boundaries of homesteads. Life in Antelope revolved around survival and labor, with families tending to livestock, growing small gardens, and trading supplies. Men labored from dawn to dusk, working the land, building structures, or venturing on long treks across the desert. Women managed households, tended to children, and maintained the routines that allowed the community to thrive. Despite harsh conditions, Antelope's residents forged a life together, creating bonds that shaped the rhythms of daily existence. As time passed, the settlement gradually emptied. Economic hardship, changes in trade routes, and the lure of larger towns drew residents away. Cabins and structures were abandoned, slowly decaying under the desert sun and wind. Wooden planks warped, roofs collapsed, and foundations became buried beneath drifting sand. Though the village was deserted, visitors and locals began reporting strange occurrences. Whispers carried on the wind, shadowy figures moving along empty streets, and the sensation of being watched as the sun dipped below the horizon. The ghostly energy of Antelope seemed to preserve the memory of those who had once lived there, replaying fragments of life in spectral form. The history of Antelope Ghost Village is inseparable from the haunting. Established during the pioneer era, it was a small but self-sustaining settlement. Families lived side by side, helping one another through the challenges of frontier life. The schoolhouse rang with children's voices, and the general store was the center of trade and conversation. Evenings often brought gatherings where stories were shared, and news from travelers or distant towns was exchanged. Life was a delicate balance of labor, leisure, and community interaction, all of which left an imprint on the physical and spiritual landscape. When residents left, the rhythm of life persisted, transformed into something ghostly, as if the village itself refused to let go of its history. Visitors to Antelope often speak of whispers drifting along the deserted streets, carried on the evening breeze. These murmurs are described as indistinct, yet strangely familiar, echoing fragments of conversations, names, or instructions. Some suggest these are echoes of pioneer life, the daily chatter of families and neighbors preserved by the empty structures. The whispers can be unsettling, appearing to follow visitors as they walk past foundations, through sand-covered paths, or near the remnants of the schoolhouse. Often, the sounds are fleeting, vanishing when one turns to locate their source. Yet they leave a lasting impression, as though the village is communicating across the veil of time. Shadowy figures are another common phenomenon. Visitors report seeing the silhouettes of men and women in period attire moving silently along streets, pausing near cabins, or walking between foundations. These apparitions often carry out mundane tasks, bending as if tending to gardens, adjusting unseen tools, or walking with the slow rhythm of daily life. Occasionally, groups of figures appear, interacting with one another before dissolving into the desert air. The shapes are rarely threatening. Instead, they suggest continuity, a replay of lives that once unfolded along these dusty roads. Children's forms are sometimes glimpsed playing near foundations or darting between structures, vanishing before they can be approached. The movements are deliberate, almost choreographed, as if the village's past exists in a loop, replaying itself silently for anyone who ventures close. The physical environment of Antelope enhances the haunting. The desert's wide open spaces, the stillness of evening, and the low light of dusk create an eerie, almost cinematic backdrop. Shadows stretch across sun-bleached wood, sand drifts through empty streets, and the wind carries both the faint whistle of the desert and the subtle echoes of past life. Foundations that remain hint at the structures that once stood, and the imagination completes the picture, allowing visitors to see the village as it once was, populated by the spirits who linger. The combination of landscape, light, and spectral presence creates an immersive experience, where past and present coexist in unsettling harmony. One evening, a visitor named Thomas explored Antelope Ghost Village as the sun set, casting a golden haze across the desert. As he walked along the old main street, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him, soft but measured, echoing against the remnants of wooden foundations. Turning slowly, he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure dressed in pioneer attire, moving toward a collapsed cabin, then pausing to look in his direction before vanishing into the desert haze. Further down the street, another figure appeared, a woman carrying an invisible bundle, walking with deliberate care before dissolving into the wind. Thomas felt a chill, a tangible sense of connection to the village's past, as if he had stepped into a moment long preserved in time. Other visitors have reported similar experiences: whispers along deserted streets, shadowy villagers moving with purpose, children appearing and vanishing among ruins, and the subtle impression of unseen eyes observing each movement. Antelope Ghost Village is not threatening, but it is persistent, an echo of pioneer life preserved by the land and remembered by those who once inhabited it. The desert holds the memory, replaying it for anyone willing to witness. Night after night, and again at dusk, Antelope Ghost Village awakens in its spectral rhythm. Figures move silently among crumbling foundations. Phantom footsteps trace empty streets, and whispers drift through the desert air. For those who venture here, Antelope is more than a deserted settlement. It is a living memory, a haunting testament to community, labor, and family life, preserved in whispers, shadows, and silent motion, waiting for anyone who dares to witness the echoes of a long-forgotten world. Waldo Logging Camp, deep in the dense forests of Lincoln County, Oregon, is a place where the past refuses to remain buried. Established in the early 20th century, it was once a bustling hub of labor, where men came to fell towering pines, transport timber, and sustain the logging economy that supported the surrounding towns. Wooden cabins lined rough-hewn paths. A central mess hall provided meals, and the air was thick with the scent of sawdust and resin. Life at Waldo Logging Camp was grueling. Long days were spent swinging axes, guiding oxen, or operating saws, while evenings were a brief reprieve, filled with meals, card games, and stories exchanged by lantern light. Danger was a constant companion. Towering trees could fall without warning, saws malfunctioned, and accidents were frequent. Despite the hardships, camaraderie flourished among workers, forming bonds that lingered far beyond the working day. As the logging industry declined in the region and timber resources dwindled, Waldo Logging Camp was gradually abandoned. Cabins rotted, paths were reclaimed by underbrush, and fallen trees began to cover the clearing where men once labored. Nature crept in, softening the marks of human activity. But the spirit of the camp did not vanish. Locals and visitors alike began reporting unusual phenomena: shadowy figures among the fallen logs, unexplained noises at night, and voices carried through the trees that seemed to echo from a time long gone. Some described the sounds of axes swinging and saws buzzing in the stillness, though no one was there to operate them. Waldo Logging Camp had become more than a forgotten sight. It was a place haunted by its own history. The history of Waldo Logging Camp is integral to understanding its haunting. Workers labored under grueling conditions, often in remote sections of the forest, far from immediate help. Accidents were common: logs rolling unexpectedly, trees collapsing, and machinery failures claimed lives. Each tragedy left a mark, not only on the families left behind, but also, it seems, on the land itself. Those who perished were often buried hastily or left in the surrounding forest due to the camp's isolation, and according to local lore, their spirits remained tethered to the place of their labor. Visitors claim that the echoes of these men, the laughter, the grumbling, the calls to one another, still reverberate through the trees, repeating their routines endlessly in spectral form. Shadowy figures are among the most commonly reported manifestations at Waldo Logging Camp. Many have witnessed human shapes, moving among fallen trees, along paths once lined with cabins, or near the remains of the mess hall. The figures often resemble the loggers of old, wearing period work clothes and carrying invisible tools. Observers describe them pausing mid-step, adjusting imaginary axes, or moving silently from one area to another. When approached, the figures vanish, melting into the forest or behind the dense undergrowth, leaving behind only the echo of movement or the faint scent of sawdust. Some visitors have described multiple figures appearing simultaneously, as if the camp's daily routines are replaying in a ghostly tableau for anyone brave enough to watch. Voices carried through the trees, often without identifiable sources. These are not sudden screams or shouts, but murmurs. Sometimes indistinct conversations, sometimes the clear calling of names. Visitors walking through the forest at dusk or night report, hearing the chatter of loggers, instructions called across work sites, or laughter from men long gone. The auditory phenomena are often accompanied by chills, sudden drops in temperature, or the sensation of being observed, reinforcing the sense that the camp itself remains alive with its past occupants. Some even report the sound of a saw cutting through timber or axes striking wood, though no tools are present. These experiences create a multi-sensory, haunting, blending sight, sound, and touch in a way that makes Waldo Logging Camp uniquely unsettling. The physical environment of Waldo Logging Camp amplifies its spectral presence. Fallen logs, moss-covered stumps, and the remnants of rotting cabins create a labyrinth of shadows and shapes. Thick underbrush and towering pines funnel wind and sound in ways that carry whispers over distances, while the filtered light of sunrise or sunset casts eerie patterns among the trees. Mist rising from the forest floor adds to the otherworldly atmosphere, making it difficult to distinguish between shadow and substance. Explorers often report the sensation of stepping into a place frozen in time, where the routines of the past continue unnoticed by the living. One visitor, a photographer named Carl, recounted his experience on a late autumn evening. As he moved along a path lined with fallen pines, he heard the unmistakable sound of an axe striking wood, followed by low voices exchanging instructions. Turning slowly, he saw the shadow of a man in old work clothes, adjusting his posture as if lifting a heavy log. Another figure appeared, carrying something invisible, moving past the remains of a cabin before disappearing into the mist. Carl felt a cold draft, as though the figures had brushed past him, and for several moments, the forest seemed alive with activity that no one else could see. Other visitors report similar experiences. Phantom loggers at work, footsteps echoing among the fallen trees, shadowy figures pausing near cabin foundations, and the pervasive sense of unseen eyes watching. Waldo Logging Camp is not malevolent, but its presence is undeniable. A persistent reminder of labor, danger, and the lives lived and lost within its boundaries. Night after night, and again at dusk, Waldo Logging Camp awakens in its spectral rhythm. Figures move among logs and cabin ruins, phantom voices drift through the trees, and the sounds of tools echo in the still air. For those who venture here, the camp is more than an abandoned logging site. It is a living memory, a haunting record of labor, camaraderie, and tragedy preserved in shadows, whispers, and ghostly motion, waiting for anyone who dares to witness the echoes of a long-forgotten world. Bohemia River Village, nestled along the dense forests of Lane County, Oregon, was once a bustling mining settlement, alive with the energy of laborers, families, and travelers navigating the rugged terrain. Established in the late 19th century, the village thrived near the banks of the Bohemia River, its waters vital for both transportation and the processing of minerals. Log cabins, a handful of small stores, and rudimentary bridges spanned the river, while makeshift machinery clanked and groaned under the efforts of miners extracting gold and other metals from the rocky hillsides. Life was harsh and demanding, shaped by the relentless labor of mining, the unpredictability of the river, and the isolation of the forested valley. Men labored from dawn to dusk, swinging picks, hauling ore, and tending sluice boxes. The air was thick with dust, the smell of wet earth, and the metallic temps of freshly mined rock. Children played along the riverbank, their laughter echoing off the trees, while women managed households, tended gardens, and helped maintain the small stores that supplied essentials. The community was tight-knit, bound together by shared effort, adversity, and the constant presence of danger. Mining was perilous work, and accidents were frequent. Cave-ins, machinery failures, and river-related drownings claimed lives with chilling regularity. Despite the risks, the village thrived, fueled by the promise of wealth and survival. As mining operations dwindled and the ore ran out, Bohemia River Village gradually fell into decline. Families left in search of better opportunities. Cabins decayed, and the machinery that had once roared with life fell silent. The river continued to flow, indifferent to the passage of time, while the forest reclaimed the streets and clearings that had once bustled with activity. But though the village was abandoned, the echoes of its past persisted. Locals began reporting unusual phenomena: shadowy figures appearing near the river crossing, the distant clatter of phantom machinery, and ghostly voices echoing through the forest. Bohemia River Village became more than a forgotten settlement. It became a place haunted by memory itself. The history of Bohemia River Village is inseparable from the haunting. The miners who worked its hills and riverbanks left an indelible mark on the land. Many perished in accidents, falls, collapses, drownings, and their spirits are said to linger, replaying the labor of their lives in spectral form. Witnesses describe shadowy figures clad in period clothing moving along the riverbank, adjusting unseen tools, or carrying imaginary loads. These apparitions often vanish when approached, leaving behind only the sense of motion or a faint echo of footsteps. At times, groups of miners are seen working together, their movements deliberate and purposeful, as if the village itself has preserved a fragment of daily life, replaying it endlessly for anyone willing to observe. The old river crossing, once vital to the settlement, is a focal point for many of the reported hauntings. Visitors speak of figures appearing along the bridge or wading near the shallow waters, their outlines dark and undefined. Sometimes a single miner stands silently, gazing at the current as if measuring the depth or inspecting a sluice box. Other times, groups of figures appear, gesturing, calling, or moving tools in a rhythm that seems unnervingly precise. The river itself seems to carry sounds from the past, distant shouts, the clanging of picks on rock, or the steady murmur of water flowing over. Shadowy figures are not the only spectral phenomena. Ghostly machinery is reported, rattling or moving on its own. Some visitors hear the grinding of unseen gears, the clatter of sluice boxes, or the creaking of pulleys, though no equipment remains functional. The combination of visual apparitions and auditory echoes creates an immersive experience, where the past feels present, and the line between reality and memory becomes blurred. Those who spend time near the old cabins, the river crossing, or the remnants of mining operations often describe a sense of being observed, as though the village itself has retained a consciousness aware of intruders in its abandoned spaces. One evening, a hiker named Margaret visited Bohemia River Village at twilight. Walking along the riverbank, she saw a shadowy figure adjusting an invisible sluice box. Its movements were deliberate, almost choreographed, and when she blinked, it was gone. Further along, she heard the distant sound of a pick striking rock, followed by voices shouting unintelligible words. The forest was silent otherwise, and no other humans were present. Margaret felt a chill sweep through her, as if the spirits of the miners had noticed her presence. She paused near the old river crossing, where two figures appeared, moving side by side, carrying unseen loads. As she watched, they slowly dissolved into the evening mist, leaving behind the echo of footsteps and the faint metallic temps of the river. Other visitors report similar experiences: ghostly miners moving among the ruins, phantom machinery operating in silence, voices echoing through the trees, and the sense of unseen eyes tracking their every step. The haunting is persistent, a living memory of the dangers, labor, and lives that shaped Bohemia River Village. The forest, river, and remaining structures act as vessels for these echoes, preserving fragments of history in spectral form. Night after night, and again at twilight, Bohemia River Village awakens in its ghostly rhythm. Figures appear near the river crossing, phantom sounds of labor echo across the forest, and shadows glide among the remnants of cabins and machinery. For those who venture here, the village is more than an abandoned mining settlement. It is a living memory, a haunting testament to the toil, danger, and community that once existed, preserved in whispers, shadows, and the persistent echoes of labor long past. Greenberry, Farmstead Ruins, tucked deep within Benton County, Oregon, is a site where the echoes of a once thriving farm linger long after its abandonment. Established in the late 1800s, the farmstead was a modest homestead of fields, barns, and a central farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. Families who lived here worked tirelessly, tending crops, raising livestock, and maintaining the barns and outbuildings that supported their daily life. Life on the farm was simple, yet grueling, defined by long hours of labor from sunrise to sunset. With the ever-present challenges of weather, disease, and isolation. Over time, the farm became known for its productive fields and abundant harvests, but it was also marked by tragedy, as accidents in the barns, livestock incidents, and illness claimed the lives of several residents. By the mid-20th century, the Greenberry farmstead had fallen into decline. Families moved away in search of better opportunities, and the once sturdy barns and farmhouse began to crumble. Wooden beams rotted, stone foundations cracked, and fields were reclaimed by forest. Despite nature's reclamation, the site never became truly silent. Locals began reporting strange phenomena, shadowy figures moving among the ruins, disembodied whispers carried on the wind, and occasional faint laughter echoing after sundown. The farmstead's isolation and the lingering sense of past activity have given rise to stories of restless spirits still inhabiting the land. Visitors often describe shadowy figures appearing among the collapsed barns and overgrown fields. These shapes, sometimes humanoid, move with purpose, as if performing the tasks of the farm long after the farm itself has vanished. Some observers report figures bending over imaginary hay bales, tending unseen animals, or walking along paths that no longer exist. The figures are rarely stationary, often appearing to move in tandem, repeating routines that feel eerily precise, as if the farm is replaying moments from its past for anyone daring enough to witness it. When approached, the shadows vanish, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps and the rustle of leaves disturbed by unseen movement. The ruins themselves amplify the haunting. Collapsed barns create labyrinthine spaces where light filters in at odd angles, casting long shadows that blur the line between solid structure and apparition. Broken fences and dilapidated tools lie scattered across the ground, creating an unsettling environment in which it is difficult to discern natural decay from supernatural presence. The farmhouse foundation, half swallowed by encroaching forest, serves as a focal point for many visitors, where whispers are strongest and the laughter most distinct. These sounds are never constant, appearing sporadically, often just as the sun dips below the horizon, carrying with them the eerie suggestion of a once bustling homestead now frozen in memory. Whispers and laughter at Greenberry Farmstead are subtle but persistent. Witnesses report hearing fragmented conversations, names called from across fields, or the soft murmur of voices among the ruins. Children's laughter has been reported near the old barn foundations, sometimes followed by the sound of running steps fading into the underbrush. Adults speak of the sensation of being watched, of an unseen presence moving near them as they explore. These auditory phenomena are often accompanied by cold drafts or sudden chills, enhancing the feeling that the farmstead itself is alive with the memory of its former inhabitants. One visitor, a photographer named Daniel, recounted his experience at dusk. He had been exploring the overgrown fields when he noticed a dark figure moving along the remains of a barn wall. Its movements were deliberate, as if tending to invisible chores. As he stepped closer, the figure paused and seemed to glance in his direction before dissolving into the shadows. Moments later, he heard faint laughter drifting across the fields, accompanied by the sound of footsteps on the crumbling wood of the barn. No one else was present, and the forest remained silent, except for the echoes of activity that no longer belonged to the living. Other explorers report similar experiences, glimpses of figures in the corners of their eyes, whispers drifting through the trees, and shadows moving across foundations long since collapsed. Some describe seeing the spectral outlines of animals, as if livestock were still grazing in invisible pastures. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile phenomena makes Greenberry Farmstead ruins a place where the past seems to reach through the present, connecting visitors with the lives once lived here in ways that are both haunting and compelling. Even after night falls, the farmstead continues its spectral rhythm. Shadows glide silently among the ruins, whispers echo across empty fields, and the laughter of long-gone children drifts on the wind. The ruins act as a vessel for memory, preserving moments of daily labor, play, and family life in ghostly form. While the farm may no longer exist as a functional homestead, its presence remains palpable, a lingering testament to the work, joys, and tragedies that defined it. For those who venture to Greenberry Farmstead ruins, the experience is unmistakable. The shadows, whispers, and faint laughter are not mere illusions but echoes of the lives once intertwined with this land. Visitors leave with the impression that the farmstead is more than abandoned property. It is a living memory, a haunting tableau, preserved in shadow and sound waiting to reveal itself to anyone who steps quietly among the ruins and listens for the whispers of the past. Shiniko Depot Ruins, located in the remote high desert of Wasco County, Oregon, is a haunting reminder of the town once called the wool capital of the world. Established in the late 19th century, Shiniko flourished as a hub of sheep ranching and railroad commerce. Its depot serving as the lifeline connecting the town to larger markets and communities across the state. Trains rumbled along the tracks day and night, delivering wool, supplies, and passengers. Workers bustled about the platform, loading and unloading freight, tending to locomotives, and maintaining the intricate network of rails and switches. The town was alive with movement, the rhythmic clatter of trains a constant background, accompanied by the shouts of station hands and the whistle of steam engines piercing the air. By the mid-20th century, Shiniko's prosperity faded. As transportation shifted and the demand for regional wool declined, businesses closed, residents moved away, and the depot fell into disuse. Wooden beams rotted, the roof collapsed, and the tracks that had once carried locomotives became warped and rusted. Yet despite the decay, the energy of the depot has never fully departed. Locals and visitors alike report eerie phenomena. Phantom trains gliding along the tracks, the sudden chill of cold spots, and whispers that call the names of those who dared to explore the ruins. Shiniko Depot became less a relic of commerce and more a site where the past manifests itself in spectral form. The haunting is often strongest along the old rail lines. Witnesses describe seeing the faint outlines of trains moving silently over the tracks, sometimes with glowing windows and ghostly smoke curling above. The engines appear complete but ethereal, the wheels and couplings glimmering in a way that suggests movement, yet vanishes when approached. Those standing nearby report the sensation of vibrations beneath their feet, as if a train is indeed rolling by, even when the tracks are long abandoned. Alongside these phantom trains, figures of workers are often observed, their forms partially transparent, performing familiar tasks, swinging wrenches, adjusting lanterns, or walking briskly across the platform. Their movements are deliberate, echoing routines frozen in time. Whispers accompany the apparitions. Visitors often hear soft voices carried on the desert wind, fragmented sentences or names called out as though to summon someone from the past. The whispers are subtle but unnerving, seeming to originate from different directions. Sometimes from the empty depot itself, sometimes from the rail lines stretching into the distance. Those who linger report cold spots, sudden drops in temperature that sweep across the ruins without warning. The combination of spectral sights, auditory phenomena, and physical sensations creates an immersive experience where the boundary between past and present blurs, leaving explorers uncertain whether they are observing history or stepping into the lingering memory of it. One evening, a photographer named Thomas visited the Shiniko Depot ruins at dusk. He set up his camera along the crumbling platform, hoping to capture the historic site under fading light. As he waited, a faint, translucent train appeared on the tracks, its engine moving slowly, the wheels spinning silently over rusted rails. At the same moment, two figures appeared, dressed in the period clothing of depot workers. They moved with careful precision, lifting imaginary crates and gesturing toward an unseen cargo car. Thomas stepped closer, his heart pounding. But as he approached, both the train and the figures dissolved into the twilight air. A whisper drifted on the wind, carrying his name in a soft, almost playful tone, and a sudden chill swept over him. He shivered, realizing that the depot had not abandoned its occupants. They had simply remained in another form, watching, performing, and calling to the living. Other visitors report similar experiences. Hikers and explorers speak of trains that appear only in peripheral vision, of figures glimpsed out of the corner of the eye, and of phantom lanterns moving across the platform. The sounds of industry-distant whistles, the clang of tools, and the murmur of conversations echo through the air when no other humans are present. Some report seeing the shadow of a conductor moving along the rails, inspecting the tracks, while the faint clatter of a ghostly freight car follows behind. The combination of sight, sound, and temperature shifts makes Shiniko Depot ruins one of the most atmospheric haunted locations in the high desert. The haunting of Shiniko Depot is tied intrinsically to the labor and life of the town. Each figure, each whisper, seems to echo the routines and relationships that once defined the depot. The phantom trains replay the commerce and travel that brought vitality to the town, while the spectral workers relive the tasks that kept the wheels turning. The cold spots and whispered names create the sense that the depot has retained a consciousness, a lingering awareness of the people who lived and worked here, preserved in memory and in shadow. Visitors often leave with the feeling that they have not simply seen apparitions, but have stepped into a living echo of history, where the boundaries of life and death are blurred by time and memory. Night falls over the Shiniko Depot ruins, and the desert grows quiet, yet the activity continues in spectral form. Trains glide along abandoned tracks, figures move among crumbling structures, and whispers call across empty fields. Those who explore after sundown find themselves surrounded by the history of the town, replaying itself endlessly, preserved in shadow, sound, and cold air. The depot is no longer a hub of commerce, but a living memory, a place where the past reaches into the present, and the spirits of Shiniko continue their work, guiding, watching, and occasionally calling the names of those who venture too close. The ruins are more than abandoned, they are haunted, a testament to the lives, labor, and presence that remain even after the town itself has faded into the desert night. Valset Schoolhouse, nestled deep within the dense forests of Poke County, Oregon, is a place where the echoes of a bygone era linger long after the final bell rang. Established in the early 20th century, the one-room schoolhouse served the children of the small logging town of Valset, a community built around the timber industry. Generations of children passed through its doors, learning their letters, numbers, and the basics of life in a remote logging settlement. The schoolhouse was modest, with a single wooden room, chalkboards lining the walls, and rows of desks worn smooth by decades of use. Winters were harsh, with snow piling against the windows, while summers brought the scent of pine and the distant hum of sawmills. For the children, the schoolhouse was both a place of education and a refuge, a center of community life where friendships were formed and memories etched. As the logging industry declined, the town of Valset slowly emptied. Families left in search of work, the mill closed, and the schoolhouse eventually fell silent. The building deteriorated over time, with its roof collapsing in places and its walls succumbing to rot and forest growth. Nature slowly reclaimed the land, and what was once a bustling center of learning became a haunting ruin, a shell of memory amid towering pines and fallen logs. Despite its abandonment, the Valset schoolhouse never lost its presence. Locals and explorers began reporting strange phenomena, shadowy figures resembling children moving among the ruins, faint whispers of lessons carried on the wind, and a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Visitors often describe ghostly children glimpsed running between the remaining walls of the schoolhouse, appearing at the edge of their vision only to vanish when looked at directly. Some see figures bent over imaginary desks, moving as if writing on unseen slates, while others report children lining up along crumbling walls, practicing lessons that have not been taught in decades. These apparitions rarely interact with the living, but their presence is undeniable, often accompanied by the faint sounds of chalk on blackboard, soft giggles, or hushed voices reciting spelling words. The ghosts seemed to replay fragments of school life, preserving the routines and energy of a community long gone. Auditory phenomena are common at the site. Whispers drift through the forest surrounding the schoolhouse, forming unintelligible sentences or faint recitations of arithmetic and spelling lessons. Visitors have reported hearing names being called, either those of the original students or strangers, as if the children are trying to summon attention from beyond the grave. Occasionally, the wind carries the sound of wooden desks scraping across the floor or the gentle tap of feet as if children were running through the hallways. These auditory cues are often sporadic, appearing when the forest is otherwise silent, heightening the sense that the schoolhouse itself is alive with memory and intent. One explorer, a historian named Margaret, recounted her experience during a late afternoon visit. She wandered among the ruins, taking notes and photographs, when she noticed a small figure dart between two collapsed walls. She moved closer, but the child vanished as though swallowed by the shadows. Moments later, she heard a faint voice reciting a lesson on vowels, the words carrying clearly through the dense trees. A sudden cold draft swept across her, and she felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Though no one else was present, the sense of life was palpable, as if the schoolhouse itself were reaching back through time, replaying the experiences of its long-departed pupils. The ruins are a maze of wooden beams, stone foundations, and forest overgrowth, creating an environment where shadows seem to move independently. Visitors report seeing multiple figures at once, some translucent, others nearly solid, all engaged in the tasks of a school day frozen in time. Shadows dart between the remaining walls, appear at windows, or linger at the edge of the clearing, vanishing when approached. The interplay between light and shadow, particularly at dawn and dusk, enhances the spectral effect, making the ruins feel alive with the presence of children who never left. Valset's schoolhouse is more than abandoned wood and stone. It is a vessel for memory. The ghosts preserve the rhythms of a life once ordinary yet intensely felt, where every laugh, lesson, and footstep is recorded in the fabric of the building. The apparitions offer visitors glimpses into the past, a haunting performance of daily life that continues long after the last student departed. Some believe the spirits are bound to the site by unresolved attachments, the echoes of a community that vanished almost entirely, leaving the schoolhouse as the last marker of their presence. Even after night falls, the haunting persists. Figures continue their silent lessons, whispers drift among the trees, and the feeling of being watched never fully disappears. Those who explore after dark often feel an icy chill, hear footsteps along non-existent hallways, and see fleeting glimpses of children moving among the ruins. The site offers no malice, but a constant reminder that the past remains, a living memory, preserved in shadow, sound, and subtle movement. For visitors, the Valset schoolhouse is a place of eerie beauty and poignant remembrance. The ruins are a connection to a vanished town, a place where ghostly children continue their lessons. Shadows dance among collapsed walls, and whispers on the wind call names that may never have been theirs. Exploring the site, one is enveloped by the presence of lives once lived, preserved in spectral form, where the ordinary routines of school days long past repeat endlessly, leaving an indelible impression of a community suspended between memory and the present. Farney Church ruins, hidden deep within the dense forests of Douglas County, Oregon, is a site where the echoes of faith linger long after the congregation dispersed. The church was built in the late 19th century by early settlers, a modest wooden structure with tall windows and a steeple that once pierced the sky. For decades, it served as the spiritual heart of the small village of Farney, hosting Sunday services, weddings, and community gatherings. Its walls were filled with the hymns of generations, voices rising together in prayer and song, while the surrounding grounds were a place for reflection, celebration, and remembrance. As the local population dwindled and families moved away, the church fell into disuse. Roof beams rotted, windows shattered, and the forest slowly reclaimed the clearing. Today, only the foundation and fragments of walls remain, the steeple long gone, leaving a skeletal outline of what once was. Despite its ruinous state, Farney Church continues to emanate a presence that draws visitors and ghost hunters alike. Those who venture into the clearing report experiences that defy explanation. Soft whispers of prayers carried on the wind, cold drafts in the absence of any breeze, and shadowy figures kneeling where pews once stood. The apparitions are often described as fleeting, appearing at the edge of one's vision and vanishing when looked at directly. Many report seeing figures kneeling or bowing, as if engaged in silent prayer. Their forms partially transparent, yet detailed enough to suggest old-fashioned clothing. Others have witnessed shadows moving along the remnants of walls, pacing as though performing rituals or making their way to seats now long gone. The figures rarely interact with the living, but their presence is unmistakable, evoking the solemn atmosphere of a sanctuary frozen in time. Auditory phenomena are common at the ruins. Visitors frequently hear the faint murmur of prayers, sometimes in unison, sometimes a single voice repeating lines from hymns or scripture. These sounds often emerge without any visible source, drifting across the clearing as though carried by an unseen congregation. Some report the distant toll of a bell, though no bell remains at the site, while others hear the soft rustle of robes brushing against wooden pews that no longer exists. The combination of visual and auditory phenomena creates an immersive, haunting experience, as if the church has preserved its spiritual life beyond the decay of its physical structure. One afternoon, a local historian named Ellen explored the ruins at dusk. As she wandered among the foundation stones, she noticed a shadow moving along the perimeter of the church. At first, she assumed it was a trick of the light filtering through the trees. Ellen stepped closer, her heart pounding, but the shadow dissolved into the forest edge, leaving only a sense of lingering devotion. Moments later, she heard a whisper, faint and almost imperceptible, repeating a line from a hymn she had sung as a child. Visitors often report a sense of reverence and unease. The air near the ruins can grow inexplicably cold, and sudden gusts of wind seem to circle the foundation, as if responding to the presence of the living. Shadowy figures are frequently seen kneeling, rising, or moving silently along the remnants of walls. The ruins themselves seem to guide the experience, with certain areas more likely to produce apparitions or auditory phenomena. Some claim that standing near the center of the foundation allows one to hear prayers more clearly, while others describe seeing forms along the periphery, as if guarding the sacred space. At night, the haunting intensifies. The forest becomes a dark enclosure, and the ruins take on an otherworldly quality. Shadow figures are said to kneel with bowed heads, sometimes fading into the mist or disappearing entirely when approached. Whispers of prayers rise from the ground, carried by a cold breeze that seems to circle endlessly. The ruins of Farney Church are a place where the boundary between the living and the spiritual world feels particularly thin, allowing the presence of past worshippers to make itself known. The haunting of Farney Church is tied not only to its physical structure, but to the memories and devotion it housed. Each shadow, each whisper, seems to echo the faith and daily routines of the congregation, preserving their practices and reverence in spectral form. The church's ruins are more than a historical site. They are a living testament to the lives and beliefs of those who gathered there, a space where the echoes of prayers and devotion continue to resonate through time. Visitors often leave with a mixture of awe and unease. They carry with them the memory of shadowy figures kneeling in silent prayer, the faint murmur of voices repeating hymns, and the cold, mysterious drafts that seem to originate from nowhere. Farney Church ruins offers no malice, but a haunting sense of devotion preserved in shadow and sound. It is a place where faith, memory, and spectral presence converge, allowing the past to remain ever present, silently calling to those who step across its foundation and into the lingering echoes of worship. Even in its ruined state, Farney Church remains alive in spirit. The ghostly congregation continues to kneel, pray, and move among the remnants of the building. Whispers and shadows serve as reminders that this sacred space, though abandoned by the living, has not been forsaken by the faithful. It is a haunting testament to the lives of those who worshipped here, and for those who visit, a glimpse into a world where devotion transcends the boundaries of time and mortality, preserving a connection between the living and the past that endures in shadow, sound, and memory. Pottersville Mill Ruins, hidden in the dense forests of Clackamas County, Oregon, is a haunting testament to a bygone era of logging and industry. Once a bustling center of timber production, the mill employed dozens of workers who labored from dawn to dusk, cutting, sawing, and transporting lumber that built towns and fueled the local economy. The mill's wooden structures, now collapsed and overgrown with moss and ivy, still hold the echoes of hammers striking wood, the rhythmic clatter of saws, and the voices of men calling instructions across the noisy floors. Time has reduced the mill to skeletal remnants, rusted machinery, splintered beams, and piles of discarded lumber. But the energy of the workers who once toiled there lingers, manifesting in eerie and inexplicable ways. Visitors to the Pottersville Mill ruins often report seeing ghostly figures moving along the remnants of the mill. These apparitions are usually humanoid shadows, dressed in work clothes from decades past, appearing near rusted machinery or along the old conveyor platforms. The figures are rarely solid, often partially transparent, fading into the mist as one approaches, yet their movements are deliberate and lifelike. Some appear to lift imaginary logs, hammer unseen nails, or carry tools across the remnants of the floor. There is no malice in their presence, only the persistence of old routines, as if the mill itself continues to operate, sustained by the memories of those who once worked there. Auditory phenomena are common at the ruins. Visitors frequently report hearing phantom axes striking timber, the rhythmic squeal of saws, and the occasional shout or grunt from workers long gone. These sounds often emerge without any visible source, blending with the rustling of the forest and the creaking of the remaining wooden structures. Whispers are also reported, often unintelligible, though some visitors claim to hear instructions being called or the repetition of familiar logging phrases. The combination of visual and auditory experiences makes the ruins feel alive with the energy of labor, creating a haunting yet strangely compelling atmosphere. One local historian, Daniel, described his experience during a late afternoon visit. He walked cautiously through the remains of the main mill building, photographing the rusted gears and decaying conveyor belts. As he paused near a collapsed wall, he noticed a shadowy figure lift what appeared to be a plank of wood, moving it across the floor with a precision that startled him. Before he could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the whisper of a distant voice calling out instructions. Daniel reported feeling a sudden chill, as if the air itself remembered the sweat and effort of decades of labor. He later recounted that the experience left him with a profound respect for the spirits of the mill, and a sense that the site preserves more than history. It preserves life, work, and dedication in spectral form. The ruins themselves enhance the haunting effect. Rusted machinery, once the lifeblood of the mill, seems almost to vibrate with the presence of the past. Conveyor wheels, saw blades, and pulley systems stand frozen in place, yet some visitors report brief flickers of movement, as though the machinery momentarily comes alive, operated by hands unseen. Shadows pass along beams and walls, moving with the same patterns as workers would have used decades ago. The interplay of light and shadow, particularly at dawn and dusk, creates an illusion of ongoing activity, with figures appearing to labor in their old routines, a ghostly performance of the mill's operational life. Some visitors have experienced sensations of being observed or followed while exploring the ruins. Steps on loose boards, the creak of machinery, and subtle movements among the ruins suggest that the ghostly workers are aware of human presence. These experiences are often accompanied by a cold draft, even on warm days, or the faint smell of sawdust and smoke, as if the mill's environment has imprinted itself on the very air. Some explorers feel a pull toward certain areas, guided by the lingering presence of the workers or the echoes of the tasks they once performed. Nighttime at the Pottersville Mill ruins amplifies the haunting qualities. Shadows lengthen and stretch across the decaying structures, figures appearing kneeling or bent over workspaces that no longer exist. Whispers rise in the darkness, sometimes clear enough to resemble instructions or counting, and the sounds of axes and saws echo unnaturally through the trees. The forest surrounding the ruins seems to absorb the light, creating a natural theater where ghostly labor continues uninterrupted, preserving the energy and dedication of those long gone. The haunting at Pottersville Mill is not rooted in fear, but in memory. The ghostly workers replay their routines endlessly, maintaining the operations of a mill that no longer functions in the physical world. Their presence is a reminder of human endeavor, of sweat and toil, and of a community that once thrived around the mill. Each figure, each sound, each flicker of movement represents a life that contributed to the mill's story. Preserved in spectral form for anyone willing to witness it, visitors often leave the ruins with a mixture of awe and reverence. The images of shadowy workers carrying invisible logs, the faint hammering of axes, and the whispers of labor echoing through the trees create a haunting but profoundly moving experience. Pottersville Mill Ruins is a place where the past persists, a testament to the lives of those who worked and the memories they left behind. It is a location where history is not only seen but felt, where ghostly labor continues endlessly, a reminder of human resilience, dedication, and the enduring presence of those who came before. The Pottersville Mill Ruins remain a living memory, a place where shadowy figures labor silently, whispers of work echo in the wind, and the sounds of axes and saws continue to resonate among the rusted remnants of machinery. It is a haunting space where the past and present converge, and for those who enter, the mill is never truly empty. The spirits of the workers persist, carrying on routines, preserving history, and creating an experience that is both eerie and reverent, allowing visitors to witness the echoes of lives devoted to labor, community, and the relentless passage of time. Mapleton Bridge Village, nestled in the thick forests of Lane County, Oregon, is a ghostly relic of a settlement long abandoned. Once a small but bustling community, the village formed around a wooden bridge that spanned the winding river below, connecting logging camps, farms, and trade routes. Families lived and worked in modest cabins, children played along the riverbank, and travelers crossed the bridge daily, carrying goods, letters, and news. The bridge itself became the lifeline of the community, a structure of timber and iron that bore the weight of commerce and connection for decades. Over time, the village declined as logging operations moved elsewhere and residents left in search of better opportunities. Today, the remains of the settlement and its bridge stand silent and decayed. Yet visitors and locals alike report that the area is far from empty. At night, the ruins are said to come alive with shadowy travelers who appear without warning. Witnesses often describe dark, indistinct forms pacing along the remnants of the bridge, their movements slow and deliberate. These figures are never fully visible, fading into the night or the mists rising from the river before they can be approached. Some observers claim to see travelers wearing old-fashioned clothing, carrying tools or bundles, and moving as if on a journey that has lasted centuries. The shadows appear in groups or alone, sometimes pausing mid-step as though caught in a moment of time, then disappearing entirely when anyone draws near. Auditory phenomena are equally striking. Whispered voices seem to drift across the river, carrying snippets of conversation, laughter, or warnings. Some visitors report hearing names called softly, often their own, though no one else is present. The sound of footsteps on wooden planks echoes across the old bridge, accompanied by the faint creak of the timber, though the bridge itself is crumbling and largely impassable. At times, the murmurs are indistinct, like travelers speaking in languages long forgotten, adding an eerie and almost timeless quality to the experience. One evening, a local historian named Claire ventured to the site just after sunset. She walked along the riverbank, examining the remains of cabins and foundations, when she noticed a faint figure moving on the bridge. The silhouette was that of a traveler, hunched slightly under a bundle, as if carrying provisions. Claire stepped closer, curiosity overcoming unease, but as she approached, the figure seemed to dissolve into the night air. leaving only the rustle of leaves and the soft gurgle of the river beneath. Moments later, she heard a whisper that sounded like a greeting from another time, and a shiver ran down her spine. She realized that the village's ghostly inhabitants were bound to the bridge and river, retracing journeys they had once made in life. The bridge and its surroundings create a natural stage for these apparitions. Broken planks, rotted support beams, and the surrounding forest cast long shadows at night, providing the perfect backdrop for the spectral travelers. Mist often rises from the river, curling through the ruins and amplifying the ethereal atmosphere. Visitors have reported seeing figures emerge from the fog, walking along paths that no longer exist or lingering at the edge of the bridge before vanishing. The interplay of shadow, mist, and moonlight produces an uncanny effect, making it difficult to distinguish between reality and the lingering echoes of the past. Some explorers report sensations of being watched or guided while near the bridge. Cold drafts sweep across the ruins, often aligning with the movement of the shadowy figures. The whispers sometimes intensify, circling around observers as if leading them toward or away from particular areas. A sense of timelessness pervades the site, as if the village exists simultaneously in the past and present, with its ghostly residents carrying on routines that no longer have a place in the living world. The haunting is not malevolent, but rather a persistent reminder of the lives, work, and journeys that once defined the settlement. Nighttime brings the most vivid encounters. Figures appear along the bridge, sometimes walking, sometimes standing still, staring out over the river as though contemplating their paths. Whispers rise from the mist, drifting like smoke across the ruins. Some have reported seeing groups of travelers crossing in procession, their forms flickering in and out of view, carrying lanterns or tools. The forest surrounding the village seems to hold its breath, amplifying every sound, movement, and fleeting shadow. The sense of history and lingering energy is palpable, a haunting yet mesmerizing spectacle for those who witness it. The haunting at Mapleton Bridge Village reflects the memory of travel, labor, and life along the river. Each shadowy figure, each whisper, represents a fragment of the past preserved in spectral form. The bridge itself, though decayed and unsaved, remains the focal point of the haunting, a place where travelers appear bound to retrace the journeys they once made. Visitors often leave with a profound impression of continuity and loss. Sensing the presence of those who lived and moved in the village long ago, the ruins of Mapleton Bridge Village are more than a historical site. They are a living memory, a place where ghostly travelers continue their silent journeys. Shadows pace the broken bridge, whispers drift across the river, and mist rises to obscure the forms of those who once called the village home. It is a haunting space, evoking both the resilience and impermanence of human life. For those who visit the ruins, offer a glimpse into a world where the past refuses to be forgotten, where travelers who walked these paths decades ago continue their eternal crossing, bound to the bridge and river by the weight of memory, routine, and spectral devotion. Mapleton Bridge Village remains alive in shadow, whisper, and mist. The travelers continue to pace, the echoes of footsteps and voices linger, and the bridge itself is never truly empty. Those who venture into the ruins step into a world where time and memory intersect, where the journey of the past persists in the present, and where the ghostly bridge continues to carry travelers across the river silently, eternally, and unseen. Antelope Church, perched in the quiet hills of Wasco County, Oregon, is a site that has long drawn both curiosity and unease. Once a small but vibrant place of worship for the early settlers of the region, the church served as a spiritual and social center for the surrounding community. Families would gather each Sunday under the wooden beams of the sanctuary, singing hymns, listening to sermons, and sharing news. The churchyard was alive with laughter during summer gatherings, the distant sound of children playing, and the occasional tolling of the bell calling parishioners to service. But over time, as families moved away and the town's population dwindled, the church fell into disrepair. Its roof collapsed, windows shattered, and walls crumbled, leaving only foundations and fragments of masonry as evidence of its former presence. Today, Antelope Church stands abandoned, a ruin overtaken by nature, yet many claim it is far from empty. Visitors to Antelope Church frequently report the presence of shadowy figures kneeling at the ruined foundations. These apparitions are rarely solid or fully defined. They often appear as dark silhouettes, crouched or bowed in prayer, their forms flickering as if caught between this world and the next. Some observers describe seeing the figures lift their heads and glance briefly toward the forest edges or the remnants of the bell tower, only to vanish when approached. The effect is haunting, creating the impression that the church is still active, that worship continues in a dimension beyond the physical. It is as if the spiritual energy of those who once prayed here lingers, echoing in the form of these ghostly worshippers. Auditory phenomena accompany the visual encounters. Many visitors report hearing faint hymns drifting through the air, soft and distant, as if carried on a breeze from another era. Sometimes the words are intelligible, familiar lines sung by unseen voices, while at other times they are fragmented, mere melodies rising and fading unpredictably. Whispered prayers and murmured voices have also been reported, seeming to come from no single source. The whispers can be comforting, like the soft guidance of a congregation, or unsettling, as if the church itself is trying to communicate, sharing fragments of forgotten sermons or calling the living to join the silent worship. One evening, a historian named Thomas visited Antelope Church to document the ruins for a local historical society. He walked carefully over moss-covered stones and collapsed wooden beams, noting the remnants of pews and the remains of the altar. As twilight fell, he became aware of a faint scent of candle wax and aged wood, despite there being no physical source. Moments later, he saw a shadowy figure kneeling near what had once been the pulpit. Thomas watched silently as the figure remained still, its form swaying gently, as if caught in a moment of reverent motion. When he took a step closer, the figure dissolved into the cooling evening air, leaving only a cold draft that brushed past his neck. The experience left him both shaken and profoundly moved. A visceral reminder that the energy of the past can persist long after structures have fallen into ruin. The ruins themselves amplify the haunting. Broken walls and exposed foundations create frames for the shadowy figures to appear within, while the uneven ground and scattered stones lend a sense of disorientation to anyone exploring the site. The wind through the hills carries faint, shifting sounds that can easily be mistaken for footsteps, soft singing, or whispered conversation. At night, the interplay of moonlight and shadow makes it appear as though the figures are moving just beyond the edges of vision, fleeting and impossible to grasp fully. Mist occasionally rises from the surrounding forest, curling around the foundations and adding to the spectral atmosphere, giving the impression that the church is veiled in a quiet, otherworldly devotion. Visitors often experience sudden cold drafts when approaching certain areas of the ruins, particularly near the altar and foundations. These gusts seem to move independently of the wind, brushing past skin and clothes without warning. Some explorers interpret these chills as a form of spiritual presence, a sign that the spirits of the parishioners are aware of the living and perhaps wish to remind them of the sanctity of the place. Others report feeling a weight in the air, a heaviness that presses on the chest or shoulders, as if the accumulated devotion of generations lingers in the ruins, waiting to be acknowledged. At night, the haunting intensifies. Shadowy figures kneel in the moonlight, their forms barely distinguishable from the darkness of the forest beyond. Faint hymns rise and fall in the wind, sometimes accompanied by the soft tapping of wooden floors or the imagined movement of pews shifting under invisible bodies. Whispered names, prayers, or instructions float through the ruins, often guiding or warning those who walk the perimeter. The sense of a congregation persisting beyond the physical world creates a deeply immersive experience, as if one has stepped into a place suspended in time, where devotion has transcended mortality. The haunting at Antelope Church is not rooted in malice, but in memory and persistence. The shadowy worshippers, the whispered hymns, and the cold drafts are manifestations of a time when the church was alive, serving as a spiritual and communal anchor. Each figure and sound is a fragment of that history, preserved in spectral form for those who encounter it. Visitors leave with a sense of reverence, the lingering feeling that they have witnessed something both sacred and inexplicably alive. Antelope Church is more than a ruin. It is a repository of devotion, memory, and spiritual energy. Shadowy figures continue their silent prayers, faint hymns echo in the wind, and cold drafts brush past without warning. For anyone who visits, the church is never truly empty. Its spirits persist, maintaining their eternal vigil at the ruined foundations, a haunting testament to faith, community, and the enduring power of devotion long after the world has moved on. The church remains a place where the past refuses to die, where shadow whisper and cold converge to preserve the presence of those who once knelt in quiet reverence, inviting the living to witness the echoes of a sacred past. Valsette's logging ruins, nestled deep within the forests of Poque County, Oregon, are remnants of a town that once thrived on timber and labor. Decades ago, the town was alive with the constant rhythm of axes striking wood, sawmills humming, and the chatter of families who built their lives around the logging industry. Timber was cut from the surrounding hills and forests, transported along makeshift roads and rail lines, and loaded onto trains that carried it to distant towns and cities. The town itself was modest but bustling, with small homes, general stores, and a schoolhouse that echoed with the laughter of children. Yet, as logging operations shifted elsewhere and natural disasters struck, Valsette's was abandoned, leaving only the skeletal remains of buildings, foundations, and pathways through the forest. Today, what remains of the town is silent and overgrown, yet visitors report that the area is far from lifeless. At dusk, shadowy figures are often seen walking the old paths where loggers once worked. These phantom loggers are rarely solid, appearing as dark silhouettes that seem to shimmer in the fading light. Observers describe figures carrying invisible axes or dragging imaginary logs, moving with the rhythm of labor long past. Sometimes the figures appear in groups, walking in formation along the old roads or pausing near the ruins of sawmills. Other times, a single silhouette can be seen bending over foundations, crouched as if inspecting the ground or completing a task unseen by the living. Those who approach find the figures vanish, leaving behind only a sense of presence and the occasional cold gust of wind that brushes past unexpectedly. Whispers accompany these spectral loggers, drifting softly through the trees and ruins. Some visitors hear indistinct conversations, as though workers are speaking in hushed tones while performing their daily tasks. Others report hearing their own names called quietly, carried through the forest as if the town itself is acknowledging their presence. The whispers are sometimes friendly, a murmured greeting or cautionary advice, but at other times they are eerie, filled with the weight of lives long gone. The sounds often seem to come from no single direction, creating a disorienting effect that makes it difficult to distinguish reality from the echo of memory. One evening, a hiker named Daniel ventured into the ruins to photograph the site as the sun began to set. He wandered along the old logging paths, stepping carefully over fallen beams and stones covered in moss. As the light faded, he noticed a figure moving along a nearby road, silhouetted against the deepening shadows of the forest. The figure seemed to carry something long and heavy across its shoulder, moving with a measured, deliberate pace. Daniel held his breath, unsure whether to approach. When he took a cautious step forward, the figure dissipated, leaving behind only a cold draft that swept across his neck and the soft creak of imagined machinery. Moments later, faint whispers floated through the air, just audible enough to suggest movement and conversation among unseen workers. Daniel realized he had encountered the lingering spirits of Valsette's, retracing their labor as they had for decades. The ruins themselves create a natural stage for the haunting. Collapsed cabins, rusted tools, and decaying sawmill structures provide frames and focal points for the shadowy figures. Broken planks and scattered logs catch the light of dusk, forming elongated shadows that seem to interact with the apparitions. Mist often rolls through the forest as evening falls, drifting along the paths and curling around the ruins, enhancing the ethereal quality of the experience. The interplay of light, shadow, and natural decay makes it difficult to discern whether the figures are figments of imagination or manifestations of the past, leaving visitors with a deep sense of unease and fascination. Cold spots are frequently reported near the ruins, often in areas where the phantom loggers appear to linger. These sudden drops in temperature can be sharp and startling, brushing past skin like icy fingers. Some interpret these chills as the residual energy of labor and life once spent in the town, lingering in the air long after the living have departed. Others believe the cold spots are a way for the spirits to make their presence known, a physical reminder that the town is haunted and that its past cannot be forgotten. The combination of visual and sensory phenomena creates an immersive experience where the forest, ruins, and spirits intertwine. At night, the haunting becomes most pronounced. Figures walk the old logging roads, shadows pause at foundations, and whispers rise and fall in the darkness. Occasional creaks and groans of rotting wood seem to mimic the sound of saws and axes long abandoned. Observers report feeling watched or gently guided by unseen hands or forces. Some hear the distant laughter of children who lived in the town or the faint calls of workers coordinating their labor. The ruins seem suspended in time, a place where history and the supernatural coexist, and where the spirit of Valsetz continues its routines long after the physical town has vanished. The haunting of Valsetz logging ruins is not overtly malevolent but deeply evocative, rooted in memory, labor, and persistence. Each shadow, each whisper, each cold gust reflects the lives of those who once built and maintained the town. Visitors leave with a profound sense of connection to the past. Sensing that they have witnessed more than mere ruins, they have glimpsed the living echoes of a community that refused to disappear entirely. Valsetz logging ruins remain alive in shadow, whisper, and chill. Phantom loggers continue their eternal labor along forested paths, carrying out tasks that no longer exist in the physical world. Whispered conversations drift across foundations. Cold drafts mark the presence of unseen hands, and the ruins themselves provide a stage for the spectral reenactment of work long completed. Anyone who ventures into the forest steps into a place where history, memory, and haunting converge, a site where the echoes of labor continue to move through shadow and wind, leaving an indelible impression of life loss and the persistent presence of the past. Shiniko, once proudly called the wool capital of the world, is now a quiet stretch of ruins in Wasco County, Oregon. The town that once thrived on sheep, railroads, and commerce has been largely abandoned for decades, leaving behind crumbling buildings, rusted machinery, and empty streets swallowed by the surrounding high desert. Yet, for those who venture into the town's remnants, the emptiness is deceiving. Locals and curious visitors alike report a presence that lingers, a subtle but persistent energy that cannot be explained by wind, wildlife, or imagination alone. Shiniko is widely regarded as the final haunted village of the region, a place where the spirits of those who lived and worked there refuse to rest, replaying fragments of their former lives amidst the ruins. Visitors entering Shiniko often feel a distinct change in atmosphere almost immediately. The air grows colder, heavier, and the silence is punctuated by faint, distant sounds that seem both human and elusive. Shadowy figures have been observed walking along the old streets, moving past the skeletal remains of homes and stores. These apparitions rarely reveal detail. They are dark, flickering forms, their edges soft, as though they are caught between this world and the next. Some observers see them carrying out mundane tasks, sweeping steps, moving crates, tending to imaginary livestock gestures frozen in time, yet fluid in motion. Others witness figures pausing at doorways, gazing toward the forest edges or the broken windows of long-abandoned shops, only to vanish when approached. The effect is disorienting, leaving an eerie sense that the town is still very much alive in ways the living cannot fully perceive. Whispers are a constant companion for anyone walking the ruins of Shiniko. Visitors often report hearing fragments of conversation, quiet murmurings drifting through the empty streets, sometimes forming coherent words, other times indistinguishable syllables. Names are occasionally heard, spoken with longing or urgency, as if calling to someone lost in time. Some whispers seem playful, echoing the laughter of children who once ran along the sidewalks, while others carry a more mournful tone, the soft sighs of villagers aware of their permanent displacement. These auditory phenomena are particularly pronounced near the old depot and along the main street, where the bustle of the town would have been at its peak decades ago. One evening, a researcher named Emily decided to explore Shiniko during the fading light of dusk. She followed the cracked and uneven pavement of the old main street, stepping cautiously over stones and fallen wood. As she moved past a crumbling general store, she noticed a shadow detach itself from the doorway. Slowly pacing along the street, Emily froze, watching as the figure moved with deliberate slowness, pausing periodically to gesture as though arranging goods or speaking to an unseen companion. She attempted to call out, but her voice seemed to dissipate in the cool air. Moments later, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving only a chilling breeze that swept past her, raising goosebumps along her arms. As she continued walking, faint whispers trailed her along the street, fragments of voices that seemed to drift from the buildings themselves. The layout of Shiniko's ruins amplifies the haunting. Broken sidewalks, exposed foundations, and the skeletal frames of buildings create a stage for apparitions to appear and disappear. Even the remnants of the train depot, once a hub of industry and travel, seem to attract the most activity. Shadowy figures are often seen near the tracks, appearing to load or unload invisible cargo, while ghostly footsteps echo across the platform. Evening mists, curling through the streets and around buildings, further enhance the spectral effect, creating the impression of movement just beyond the edge of vision. Light from the setting sun casts long shadows that intertwine with the apparitions, making it nearly impossible to distinguish between reality and the echoes of the past. Cold drafts frequently accompany these encounters, often sweeping across the streets or through open doorways of abandoned structures without any apparent source. Some visitors report sudden chills that move up the spine, leaving a lingering sensation of being watched. These drafts seem to mark the presence of lingering spirits, or perhaps act as a bridge between the living and the departed. They are often strongest near the center of the town, around the old general store, the post office, and the depot, places that would have been filled with activity during Shiniko's heyday. At night, the haunting becomes more intense. Figures move along the deserted streets, pausing to gesture at foundations, or look toward the forest that encroaches upon the town. Whispers rise and fall with the wind, and occasional faint lights flicker near buildings, resembling lanterns once used by townsfolk or travelers. Observers report the sensation of being followed, though no footsteps can be heard. Some claim to feel a presence brushing past them, as if unseen villagers are passing through, replaying moments of their daily lives long after the physical town has ceased to exist. The town feels suspended in time, a space where past and present intersect, and the echoes of life are preserved in shadow and sound. Shiniko's haunting is not one of malevolence, but of memory and persistence. The shadows, whispers, and cold drafts reflect a longing to be remembered, to continue existing in the form of energy and motion even after the physical structures have decayed. Visitors often leave with a profound sense of awe and unease, as though they have glimpsed a world frozen in time, a village where the departed continue to live their routines, forever trapped in the streets and woods they once called home. The ruins of Shiniko are alive in shadow, whisper, and chill. Phantom villagers walk the streets, invisible hands seem to gesture from crumbling foundations, and faint murmurs echo along the deserted avenues. Those who venture here witness the persistence of the past, a haunting reminder that even in abandonment, life leaves an indelible imprint. Shiniko's spirits continue their silent vigil, replaying daily routines and tender moments, preserving the memory of a town that no longer exists in the physical world but thrives eternally in the spectral realm. The village is a place where history refuses to die, where shadows, whispers, and cold meet to keep alive the presence of those who once called Shiniko home. These are the haunted village ruins of Oregon, where shadows move silently, whispers echo through the trees, and spirits refuse to rest. Each ruin tells a story of lives interrupted, tragedies endured, and souls left behind. If you ever venture into these deep woods, watch carefully. Shadowy figures may move in the corner of your eye, whispers may call your name, and the wind may carry voices of the past. The villages may be abandoned, but the spirits are very much alive. Thank you for walking through Oregon's haunted village ruins with me. Stay cautious, stay curious, and always respect the spirits who wander the forests long after their lives have ended.